A CEO humiliated him in front of everyone, had him escorted out like a criminal. She never imagined that the man she discarded would be the only one who could save her company, or that throwing him out would be the biggest mistake of her life. If this story hits you, hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Follow along and don't leave before the ending. You won't want to miss what happens. The lobby of Virion Systems smelled like money. Not the kind you earned slowly. The kind that had been there so long it became invisible to the people who moved through it every day. Polished concrete floors that probably cost more per square foot than Ethan Calloway made in a month. A reception desk made from a single slab of dark stone. Glass walls that showed you the city spread out below like something you were supposed to want. Ethan didn't notice most of it. He was tired in the way that goes past bones, past muscle, down into something harder to name. He'd been up since 4:30 that morning loading the van at the supply depot on Meridian Street. It was now 2:30 in the afternoon, and he still had 2 more stops after this one, plus a school pickup at 3:15, dinner to figure out, and a broken circuit panel in the basement of a restaurant on Colfax that needed attention by 8 o'clock tonight. He pushed his handcart through the lobby's glass entrance and stopped at the security desk the way he always did. The same guard, Marcus, was usually there on Tuesday afternoons. Marcus wasn't there today. Instead, there was a younger man Ethan didn't recognize. Late 20s, the kind of stiff posture that comes from wanting to look important. "Delivery," Ethan said, and held up the manifest. "Specialized components for the IT infrastructure team. 3rd floor." The guard looked at the manifest, looked at Ethan, looked at the handcart with its 2 sealed boxes marked with Virion's own purchase order numbers. ID. Ethan fished his driver's license and his company badge from his jacket pocket. The guard typed something, frowned at the screen, typed something else. Ethan waited. He was used to waiting. There was a particular skill to it, keeping your body still while your mind ran through everything else you needed to do that day. Sophie had a book report due Thursday. He hadn't asked her about it. He needed to ask her about it. "You're not in the system," the guard said. "Marcus usually checks me in manually. The vendor registration expired last month and the company's been trying to update it for 3 weeks." "I don't know who Marcus is." "He's the Tuesday afternoon guard. Has been for about 2 years." "I'm the Tuesday afternoon guard." Ethan took a slow breath. "Okay, can you call up to the IT department? Ask for Denny Marsh or Priya Subramaniam. Either one of them can confirm the delivery." The guard picked up the phone with the careful deliberateness of someone who wanted you to know they were doing you a favor. He dialed, waited, dialed again. Nobody picked up. The IT department was probably in the middle of something. They usually were on delivery days. "Nobody's answering," the guard said, as if this settled the matter. "Can you try facilities, extension? Sir, if you're not in the system and nobody can confirm, I have the purchase order right here." Ethan pulled the folded paper from inside the manifest folder and set it on the desk. The Virion Systems letterhead was right there at the top, with the order number and the authorized signature from their procurement department. "This is your company's document. Your company ordered these parts." The guard looked at the paper with the expression of a man who had decided to be unmoved by evidence. "I still need to confirm with someone in the building." "Then confirm. I'll wait." So Ethan waited. He stood to the side of the security desk the way he'd been positioned by the guard's gesture, near a low bench that ran along the lobby wall. He didn't sit. He'd learned that sitting made you look like you planned to stay, and people in lobbies like this one got nervous about that. He stood with his hands on the handcart bar and looked at nothing in particular. The lobby was busier than usual for a Tuesday. Groups of men and women in good suits moved through in clusters, the kind of purposeful movement that meant something was happening upstairs. Ethan had been delivering to enough corporate buildings to read the atmosphere. There was a tension in how people carried themselves, a sharpness to the way they spoke to each other in passing. Whatever was going on at Virion Systems, it wasn't a quiet Tuesday. He'd been standing there for maybe 12 minutes when he heard a shift in the lobby's acoustics, the subtle way a space changes when someone important enters it. He didn't look up immediately. It wasn't his business. He heard someone say, "Move the demonstration to Thursday, which gives us less than..." and then a different voice cutting across.
That's not enough time to... And then the first voice again, lower and sharper, in the tone that ends conversations rather than continuing them. Ethan glanced over. There were 5 of them moving through the lobby toward the elevators, 3 men and 2 women, all in the kind of clothes that meant senior management at minimum. One of the women was in front, half a step ahead of the group in a way that wasn't accidental. She was younger than he expected for someone who moved like that. Dark blazer, dark slacks, dark hair pulled back. She was looking at her phone as she walked, and the 4 people behind her were watching her the way you watch someone when everything they say matters. That would be Olivia Hartwell. He'd heard the name, too. People at the depot talked, and Virion Systems came up often enough. She'd taken over the company at 27 after her predecessor had a stroke, rebuilt the executive team in 18 months, and turned a struggling software firm into a government contracting machine. She was either going to make the company or collapse it, depending on who you asked. She looked like neither was something she'd considered worrying about. Ethan turned back toward the security desk. The guard was on the phone again, or still, or pretending to be. Hard to tell. A woman from the group of executives peeled off toward the reception desk for something. The others kept moving toward the elevator bank. One of the men was carrying a large folder and talking. Something about vendor timelines, Ethan caught a phrase. And he wasn't watching where he was going. He walked directly into the edge of Ethan's handcart. The man startled back. The folder went sideways, papers scattered, and the coffee the man had been holding in his other hand, a large paper cup from somewhere, went up, tipped, and came back down, splashing across the polished concrete floor between them in a wide brown arc that caught the edge of Ethan's boot and the leg of the man's trousers. "What the?" the man said, loud. "I'm sorry," Ethan said immediately, bending to pick up the folder and the papers. "That was my fault. I should have moved the cart farther from... Where did this guy come from?" The man was looking down at his trousers. The stain was visible. He wasn't speaking to Ethan, he was speaking to the air around him, the way people did when they wanted an audience. The papers were sliding around in the puddle of coffee. Ethan was trying to salvage them without making it worse. One of the other executives, a woman with reading glasses pushed up on her head, stepped in and started picking up papers from the dry side. The guard had materialized from behind his desk and was standing 3 feet away doing nothing useful. "I've got these," Ethan said. He was gathering the papers, stacking them, trying to check if any were soaked through. "I'm really sorry. If you have a card, I can cover the dry cleaning." "Hey." The voice came from his left, and it was the kind of voice that you felt before you processed it. Not loud, but with a quality of compressed authority that made you stop. Ethan straightened up with the folder of papers in his hands and turned. Olivia Hartwell was standing 4 feet away. She was closer than he'd expected, which meant she'd moved fast. Her phone was in her hand, but she wasn't looking at it anymore. She was looking at him with the specific flat attention of someone making a rapid assessment they've already mostly completed. "Who are you?" she said. "Ethan Calloway. I'm making a delivery for... Why are you standing in the middle of my lobby?" He noticed the way she said it. My lobby, not the company's lobby. Hers. "I'm waiting for someone to confirm the delivery upstairs. The vendor registration system has an issue, and you've been standing here for how long?" He looked at his watch. "About 15 minutes. She looked at the guard. "Why wasn't this handled when he came in?" The guard started to explain something. Olivia cut him off with a look that wasn't even sharp so much as final. Then she looked back at Ethan, at the handcart, at the coffee puddle still spreading on the floor. "You need to leave," she said. Ethan went still. "Ma'am, I have a delivery. I see what's happening here. You walked in, you had some issue at the desk. You've been standing here for 15 minutes causing problems. Now there's coffee on my floor and on my VP's suit." She tilted her head very slightly. "Whatever the situation is, you need to take it somewhere else." "I'm not causing problems. The delivery..." "Jackson." She didn't raise her voice. One of the 2 security personnel who had appeared from somewhere heard his name and stepped forward. "Please escort this gentleman out." "Whoa." Ethan took a half step back from the hand that reached for his elbow. Not aggressive, just reflex, the kind of thing anyone does when a stranger tries to grab them. I'm a delivery driver. I have a purchase order from your company. I'm not loitering. I'm doing my job." Olivia looked at him for 2 seconds. It was a very considered 2 seconds. He got the distinct impression she saw the coffee stain on his boot, the worn knees of his work pants, the logo of a mid-tier supply company on his jacket, and reached a conclusion from all of that without consulting him about it. "Please go," she said. The security guard's hand found his elbow again, firmly this time. The papers were still in Ethan's hands. He set them down on the bench, carefully, neatly, all in order, and turned away from the handcart that he'd now have to come back for or figure out, and walked toward the lobby exit with the security guard 3 feet behind him the whole way. He didn't look back. There was nothing to look at. The glass door swung open and the noise of the outside city replaced the climate-controlled quiet of the lobby, and Ethan Calloway stood on the sidewalk in the afternoon sun and took one long breath through his nose and let it out slow. The security guard had said something about the company's right to refuse service. Ethan hadn't heard most of it. He was doing the math in his head. The delivery was now incomplete, which meant paperwork, which meant a conversation with his supervisor, which meant time he didn't have. He called the depot on his walk back to the van. The delivery at Virion didn't go through, he told his supervisor, a woman named Carol who had been doing this job for 22 years and had a voice like someone who stopped being surprised by anything around year 4. "They refuse it?" "Kind of. It's complicated. The parts are still in their lobby." A pause. "You left the parts?" "They had security walk me out before I could get them." Another pause. Longer this time. "Ethan." "I know. I'll figure it out. Can you get someone to call their facilities manager? Get authorization to come back for them?" "I'll try." "How'd this happen?" He was at the van now. He put his hand on the door and leaned against it for a second. "I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Somebody important decided I didn't belong there." Carol made a sound that managed to be both sympathetic and exhausted. "I'll make the calls. Go do your last stop." "Yeah." He drove. The afternoon traffic was the usual kind of obstacle course, and he moved through it on autopilot, hands on the wheel, brain doing the other work. He was not angry, exactly. He had felt the sharp flash of it in the lobby when the security guard's hand closed around his elbow. That animal indignation, the one that says, "I am not this." But it had burned off fast. Anger was a luxury with a high cost, and he'd learned to spend it carefully. What stayed with him was something more specific and harder to name. The way Olivia Hartwell had looked at him in those 2 seconds. The survey, the conclusion, the dismissal. As if the worn knees of his pants were a complete sentence. As if the coffee on his boot was all she needed to know about who he was. He'd been looked at that way before, in the years since he'd left the industry. He thought he was used to it. He wasn't used to it. He picked Sophie up from school at 3:18, 3 minutes late, and found her sitting on the front steps with her backpack on her lap, and the expression she wore when she was trying to look like she hadn't been watching for him. "Traffic," he said when she got in. "I know, Mrs. Patterson asked me if I needed to call someone, and I said no." "Good call." "She waited with me, though, outside." "Then thank her tomorrow." Sophie put her backpack on the floor and buckled her seatbelt and looked out the window. She was 7 years old and already had the conversational patience of someone much older. She knew when her father had had a day, and she knew how to sit with it, which was something Ethan felt guilty about more than he let on. That she'd learned that she'd had to. "How was your day?" he asked. "Fine. We did fractions." "Hard?" "Not really. Ms. Rivera says I'm good at them." "She's right, you are." Sophie looked sideways at him. "Your day wasn't fine." It wasn't a question. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was watching him with her mother's eyes. That particular dark brown with the slight uptilt at the outer corners that he sometimes wasn't ready to see. "It had a rough part," he said. "What happened?" He thought about how to explain it. He settled on the version that was true but incomplete. "I was doing a delivery and somebody decided I didn't look like I was supposed to be there. So they had me leave." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "Did you get in trouble at work?" "Maybe a little. I'll sort it out." "That's not fair." "No," he agreed. "It's not." They stopped at a red light. In the car beside them, a man about his age was singing along to something on the radio, completely unself-conscious about it, moving his head. Ethan watched him for the 3 seconds the light lasted. "Dad," Sophie said. "Yeah. You always say that stuff works out. It usually does. So this will too." He looked at her again in the mirror. She had the same flat certainty she always had when she was telling him something she'd already decided to believe. He didn't know if he'd taught her that, or if she'd arrived with it. "Yeah," he said. "Probably." The restaurant job that night ran late. The circuit panel in the basement of Gusto's on Colfax turned out to have 2 separate faults, not one, and the second one was nested inside a junction box that had last been properly serviced sometime in the mid-90s. Ethan finished just before 10. He drove home with the particular exhaustion that comes from working with your hands for many hours. A different kind of tired than the mental kind, more physical, but somehow cleaner. Sophie was asleep when he got in. Mrs. Okafor from downstairs had been watching her, as she did on the nights Ethan had evening work. She was a retired school administrator in her late 60s who seemed to find Sophie genuinely interesting and charged Ethan a rate he knew was well below what she could get. He'd tried to argue about it once. She'd given him a look that suggested he should try something more productive with his time. He paid her, thanked her, locked the door. He stood in the middle of the apartment for a minute in the quiet. It was a 2-bedroom apartment in a building that had been built in the 70s and maintained with varying degrees of commitment since then. The kitchen appliances were from at least 2 different decades. One of the windows in the living room had a frame that expanded and contracted with the weather and wouldn't close entirely in summer. Sophie had a poster of a cartoon rabbit on her bedroom door. Ethan went to the kitchen and stood in front of the open refrigerator for a while, not really seeing anything in it, then closed it. He sat down at the small kitchen table and looked at the stack of papers there, bills mostly, and Sophie's school forms that needed signing, and a notice from the city about some road construction on their block that was going to complicate his early mornings for the next 3 weeks. He thought about the lobby, the polished floor, the way the coffee had spread across it. He thought about the woman, Olivia Hartwell, and the particular economy of her dismissal, the way she'd done it without heat, without cruelty, without anything that could be called deliberate. That was almost the worst part. She hadn't been mean, she'd been efficient. She'd looked at him and processed him and removed him the way you'd remove a distraction from a meeting agenda. He'd been a systems architect once. He'd designed distributed infrastructure for organizations across 4 states. He'd sat in rooms like Virion's conference rooms and had people listen to him the way people listen to someone whose time was valuable. He'd been the person who walked into a building and got shown where to go, not walked out of it. That was a different life. That was before Claire got sick, before 18 months of hospitals and treatments, and the particular mathematics of watching someone you love fight something that doesn't care how hard they fight it. Before Sophie was 4 years old, and he'd had to explain something to her that he didn't entirely understand himself. He'd left the industry 2 weeks after Claire died, not because he couldn't do the work. He could still do the work. That part of his brain hadn't gone anywhere, but because the work required a kind of sustained focus that felt impossible to sustain when half your attention was always on a small person who needed you to be present. The job at the supply depot had come through a friend of a friend. It paid less than 1/3 of what he'd been making. It had hours he could work around Sophie's school schedule. He hadn't thought of it as a sacrifice at the time. He'd thought of it as arithmetic. Now, sitting in his kitchen at 10:15 on a Tuesday night, he was aware of the gap between what he'd been and what he looked like, between the information available about him and the information that could be inferred from looking at him in a supply company jacket in a corporate lobby. He wasn't bitter about it. He was just aware of it in a way that tonight had made sharp. He signed Sophie's school forms. He paid the electricity bill online. He went to bed. The days after had the same shape they always did. Wednesday, deliveries, pickup, homework, a leaking utility room at an apartment building on 17th. Thursday, deliveries, pickup, Sophie's book report, which she'd done herself and which was actually pretty good for a 7-year-old, and a call from Carol at the depot confirming that the Virion delivery had been sorted out. Someone from their facilities department had come down and collected the parts themselves, and the incident had been logged as a security miscommunication. "No blowback?" Ethan asked. "Not to us," Carol said. Client side, I don't know. That's not our problem. Okay. You're not on their approved vendor list anymore, though. They updated their system to flag your badge. He absorbed that. Okay, he said again. You'll get a different building. Yeah, he got a different building. A law firm on Champa Street that had a perfectly functional security system and a front desk that processed him in 4 minutes and always had a bowl of wrapped candy that Sophie liked. It was fine. He moved on. Except that he kept thinking about the Virion lobby. Not constantly. He had too much happening to dwell on anything constantly. But in the gaps, in the idle moments between one task and the next. Something about it kept surfacing. He knew, in the detached and analytical way he'd always processed systems, that what had happened wasn't personal. Olivia Hartwell didn't know him. She'd made a decision based on incomplete information and the specific weight she assigned to certain data points, the jacket, the age, the worn work clothes, and the decision had been logical given those inputs. It was almost elegant in its efficiency, if you looked at it from the outside. The problem was he couldn't look at it from the outside. He was the incomplete data point. He was what she'd gotten wrong. Friday came. Friday night he had nothing scheduled, which was unusual enough that he almost didn't know what to do with it. Mrs. Okafor had given Sophie a small, succulent plant as a present, and Sophie had spent 45 minutes deciding where to put it, finally settling on the windowsill in her room where she said it would get what she called the morning light. How do you know about morning light? Ethan asked. I looked it up. Succulents need bright, indirect light. When did you look this up? Yesterday, when you were on the phone with Mrs. Carroll. He watched her position the small plant, adjusting it by millimeters with a precision that was entirely her own, nothing of his in it. It looks good, he said. I know. Then, without looking up from the plant, Are you okay? You've been weird this week. I've been weird? Quiet weird, not bad weird. He leaned against the doorframe of her room. Just tired, I think. Sophie considered this the way she considered most things, thoroughly and with a certain suspension of judgment that he found both reassuring and occasionally unnerving in a child her age. Okay, she said finally, but if it's about that thing that happened on Tuesday with the delivery person. Delivery, I'm the delivery person. I know. If it's about that, you shouldn't keep being upset about someone who doesn't know you. It doesn't make sense to care what they think. That's very logical. Ms. Rivera says emotions don't always have to make sense, but they should at least be useful. Ethan looked at his 7-year-old daughter. Ms. Rivera said that to your class? She said it to Marcus when he was crying about losing his pencil case, and she thought I wasn't listening. But I was. He laughed. It came out real, not performed. Sophie looked satisfied and turned back to her plant. Go to bed at 8:30, he said. 8:45. 8:30. 8:42. 8:35, and that's genuinely my final offer. She thought about it. Deal. He went to the kitchen and put water on for tea he probably wouldn't drink and stood in the small apartment that was his entire domestic world and let himself feel, for a moment, how tired he was. Not just tonight tired, the deeper kind. The kind that came from running at 100% for years with no margin and no net. He was okay. He was always okay. He just needed to keep being okay, and he would, because the alternative wasn't an option in any real sense. And because Sophie was 8 feet away deciding that 8:32 was a reasonable compromise position on the negotiation they hadn't finished, and she needed her father to be okay. He poured the tea when it was ready. He sat down at the kitchen table. He looked at the stack of papers. He started on the utility bill for the following month. Outside, the city moved the way cities do at night. All its machinery turning, all its systems running, most of it invisible to most of the people living inside it. In a glass tower downtown, the servers that ran Virion systems were already starting to behave in ways that no one had noticed yet. Small things, almost imperceptible things. The kind of things that look like noise until they don't. He got the call on the following Monday evening, after his last delivery and before Sophie's school pickup. Except it wasn't a call. It was his old friend Daniel Marsh, who went by Denny and who happened to be the head of IT infrastructure at Virion Systems. Denny had tracked him down through the supply company and then through his personal phone number, a process that apparently involved 3 separate conversations and some mild deception because Denny was persistent when he wanted to be and not above creative interpretation of the truth. "Before you say anything," Denny said when Ethan picked up. "I wasn't going to say anything yet. Before you say anything, I want you to know I had no idea you were the one they flagged. I was in a server room in the sub-basement with no signal. Otherwise, I would have—" "Denny." He was driving. He moved the phone to speaker. "It's fine." "It's not fine. They walked you out of the building like you were—" "I know what they did. I was there." A silence. "I'm sorry, man. I'm genuinely sorry." Ethan let that sit for a moment. He and Denny had worked together years ago at a firm called Archway Solutions before Ethan had left the industry. They'd stayed in loose contact in the way that people do when they like each other, but their lives have pulled in different directions. Occasional texts, a lunch every 8 or 9 months, the kind of friendship that doesn't require maintenance to remain intact. "How's Sophie?" Denny asked. "She's good, growing, has opinions about succulents now." "Sounds right." A pause. "Look, I want to say something and I need you to let me finish. Okay? We have a problem at Virion. It started small, maybe 10 days ago. Random system anomalies. Nothing that set off alarms on its own, but there's a pattern I can feel even if I can't pin it yet. And the timing is really bad because we have a government contract demonstration on Thursday that is, it's significant, career significant, company significant." Ethan drove. A stoplight turned red. He stopped. "I've got 6 engineers on it," Denny continued. "Smart people. And none of them can find what I'm feeling. They keep looking at the obvious places, and I keep thinking it's somewhere else." "Where do you think it is?" A longer silence this time. "I don't know. That's the problem. But Ethan, you used to be able to find things that nobody else could find. Remember that job at Harwick? The phantom load issue that 3 firms had looked at?" He remembered. It had taken him 2 days, and the solution had been absurdly simple once you saw it. A misconfigured handshake protocol that was creating cascading micro-latencies across the whole network. Everyone had been looking for something complex. He'd found something embarrassingly straightforward, hiding in plain sight. "I'm not in that world anymore," Ethan said. "I know you're not. I'm not asking you to come back to it. I'm asking you to maybe take a look. As a favor, I'll pay you consulting rate." The light turned green. He moved. "I'm a delivery driver, Denny. You're a delivery driver who could rebuild our entire infrastructure architecture in his sleep, and you know it." Denny's voice had an edge of honest frustration in it, the kind that comes from caring about someone and watching them undersell themselves. I'm not dismissing what you do. I know why you made the choices you made. I need your eyes on this." Ethan was quiet for a moment. The city passed by. He thought about Thursday, which was 3 days away. He thought about Virion Systems and its glass lobby and its polished floor and the particular 2 seconds during which a decision had been made about him. "I'll think about it," he said. "That's all I'm asking." He hung up. He sat with it for the rest of the drive. He thought about it through Sophie's pickup and through dinner, which was pasta with the jarred tomato sauce she liked, and a salad with the cucumber cut the way she preferred, thin rounds, not half moons, and through a phone conversation with Mrs. Okafor about a scheduling conflict the following week. He thought about it while Sophie did her homework at the kitchen table, and he sat across from her paying bills. He didn't think he would go. He was fairly certain he wouldn't go. He had no interest in walking back into that building and no obligation to do it, and there was something about the idea that felt like it was giving them something they hadn't earned. But Denny's voice had been real. Denny was worried in the way that engineers worry when they know something is wrong and can't find where it is, a specific and deeply uncomfortable kind of worry, one that Ethan remembered from his own career. It wasn't theatrical, it was just true. He put his pen down and looked at Sophie. She was writing something in her workbook, concentrating, her tongue pressing against the inside of her cheek the way it did when she was working something out. "What?" she said without looking up. "Nothing, just looking." "You've been thinking about something since dinner." He didn't respond immediately. She finished a sentence in her workbook and looked up. A friend called today, Ethan said. He works at that company, the one from last week. Sophie's face shifted just slightly. The one that kicked you out? They didn't exactly... He stopped. Yeah, that one. He wants me to help with a problem they're having. Sophie looked at him steadily. Are you going to? I don't know. Do you want to? That was the better question, actually. He turned it over. Part of me does, he said honestly. The part that misses working on problems like that. What does the other part say? The other part says it's not my problem. Sophie was quiet for a moment. She put her pen down and folded her hands on the table with the deliberateness of someone who had something considered to say. Dad, she said, if you can help someone and you don't because they were mean to you, that makes you the mean one now. He looked at his daughter. Ms. Rivera? He asked. No, she said. Me. He was quiet for a long time. Sophie picked her pen back up and returned to her workbook. The apartment held its usual evening sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint noise of the building's pipes, someone's television 2 floors up. Ethan reached for his phone. He texted Denny, "Tell me more about the pattern you're seeing." Denny's response came back in 40 seconds, which meant he'd been waiting. It was a long text. Technical, specific. Exactly the kind of detail that would mean nothing to most people and meant quite a lot to Ethan. He read it twice. He read it a third time. Something shifted in his thinking. Not a conclusion yet, just the first movement of one. A direction. He looked up from his phone at the kitchen ceiling. There it is, he thought. Not the answer, just the shape of where the answer might be. He put the phone down. He would think about it more tonight. He'd decide in the morning. He was already deciding. He didn't sleep much that night, not because he was anxious, but more because his brain had switched into a mode he hadn't used in a while, the kind where it keeps working even when the rest of him wants to stop. He lay in the dark and turned Denny's text over in his mind the way you turn a physical object in your hands, looking for the angle that makes it make sense. The pattern Denny described was strange. Not catastrophic yet, but strange in a specific way. Intermittent latency spikes in sectors that shouldn't be talking to each other. Small authentication delays that resolved themselves before anyone could isolate them. A handful of log entries that looked like noise but appeared at intervals too consistent to be accidental. Individually, each one had a reasonable explanation. Together they had a shape that Ethan recognized the way you recognize a face before you remember the name attached to it. He got up at 5:15 and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a notepad, which he hadn't done in years. He wrote things down, not conclusions, just questions, the kind that pointed in a direction. By the time Sophie's alarm went off at 7, he had 3 pages covered in the cramped shorthand he'd developed during his Archway years, and a headache from the concentration, and a clear sense of what he thought he was looking at. He wasn't certain. He needed to see the actual logs to be certain, but the shape of the thing was beginning to emerge from the noise, and it was not a comfortable shape. He dropped Sophie at school and called Denny from the van. "I want to see the system logs," he said. "Full access, not a summary. And I need the network topology diagram from whoever built your current infrastructure." Denny was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "So you're coming in?" "I'm looking at logs. I'm not committing to anything past that." "Right, sure, of course." But he could hear Denny trying not to sound relieved and failing. "I'll set you up with guest credentials. When can you I have deliveries until noon. After that, I have a 2-hour window before school pickup." "I'll have everything ready." He did his morning route with the particular focus he brought to everything. Not remarkable, not inspired, just the reliable competence of someone who does a job properly because doing it badly costs time. The buildings on his route were the same buildings they always were, with the same loading docks and the same sign-in procedures, and the same faces who knew him by name or by the logo on his jacket. He moved through them efficiently and without drama and was back in the van by 11:50. He sat in the van for a moment before starting it. He thought about what Sophie had said last night. If you can help someone and you don't because they were mean to you, that makes you the mean one now. He thought about Olivia Hartwell, the 2 seconds, the flat efficiency of it. Then he started the van and drove toward downtown. Denny met him in the parking structure beneath the Virion building, which was not an accident. It meant Ethan didn't have to go through the main lobby. He wasn't sure if Denny had thought of this deliberately or if it was just practical, and he didn't ask. Denny looked worse than the last time Ethan had seen him, 8 months ago, maybe 9, at a lunch place on Larimer. He was a compact man in his early 40s with a programmer's habit of looking slightly past you when he was thinking, and right now he was looking considerably past Ethan. "You look terrible," Ethan said. "I've been sleeping in my office since Thursday." "Does your wife know that?" "My wife sent me a care package on Saturday. She's given up." They took a service elevator up to the 4th floor, which housed a secondary server room and a row of analyst workstations that were separate from the main open plan office. It was quieter up here. No one looked up when they came in. Denny had set up a workstation at the end of the row with Ethan's guest credentials already loaded. The logs were there. All of them, unfiltered, going back 30 days. It was a significant amount of access to give a guest. Ethan didn't comment on it. He sat down. "Talk me through what your team has already ruled out," he said. Denny pulled up a chair and spent 15 minutes running through it. Hardware failures, checked and rechecked. Software updates that might have introduced instability, audited line by line. Vendor integration issues, 2 candidates investigated, neither confirmed. External attack surface, monitored continuously, nothing incoming that the security tools had flagged. "So your team thinks it's internal," Ethan said. "My team thinks it's a configuration error somewhere that's creating feedback. I think they're wrong." "Why?" "Because configuration errors don't have rhythm." Denny tapped the screen where the log entries were displayed. "Look at the timestamps. The spikes aren't random. They're not constant. They cluster." Ethan had already seen it. He'd been looking at the timestamps for 3 minutes while Denny talked. 12 to 14-hour intervals, give or take. "Nobody on my team noticed that." "They're looking for what, not when." Denny looked at him. "Yeah, exactly." Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. He was scrolling through the logs with the particular quality of attention that some people bring to reading and others bring to listening to music. A kind of absorption that isn't passive, that's actively sorting and filing even when it looks like stillness. He found the first one, then the second, then 3 more in a sequence that made the picture clearer and worse at the same time. "Denny," he said. "Yeah." "This isn't a configuration error." A silence. Denny had gone very still beside him. "Who has access to your network management layer?" Ethan asked. "Not the surface. The actual management layer. The part that can modify routing tables and authentication parameters without triggering standard alerts." It's a short list. 6 people, maybe 8. Someone on that list, or someone who got credentials from someone on that list, has been making very small, very deliberate modifications to your routing configuration on a cycle. Nothing big enough to trigger automated alerts, small enough to look like normal system variants, but cumulative. He pointed at the screen. "See this sequence here? Each modification is minimal, but they stack. And if you extend the pattern forward 3 days..." He didn't finish the sentence. He opened a second window and ran a projection using the interval data and the modification pattern. The graph that appeared was not subtle. Denny looked at it. The color left his face the way color leaves a face when the thing you were afraid of turns out to be real. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday afternoon if I'm reading the projection right. The cumulative effect of the modifications crosses a threshold and your authentication layer fails system-wide. Everything that requires credentialed access goes down at once. The demonstration is Thursday at 2. "I know." Denny put both hands flat on the desk and stared at the screen. "This is deliberate. Someone is doing this deliberately. Yes. That's not a configuration error. That's sabotage." Ethan said the word plainly, without drama. It was just the accurate word. Someone with inside access has been preparing this for at least 3 weeks. Probably longer. They've been careful. But not careful enough. They were careful enough that your team didn't catch it. They weren't counting on someone looking at the timestamps. Denny pushed back from the desk and stood up. He paced 2 steps in one direction, stopped, paced back. He had the specific energy of a man who wanted to do 6 things simultaneously and couldn't figure out which one to start. "I need to tell Olivia,"
he said. Ethan didn't react to the name. He was still looking at the logs. There was a fourth-layer authentication sequence buried in the data that he wanted to look at more closely. Something about it bothered him in a way he couldn't articulate yet. Ethan. Denny had stopped pacing. He was looking at him with an expression that had genuine discomfort in it. She's going to want to know who found this. Tell her whatever you want to tell her. She's going to want to talk to you. She doesn't need to talk to me. You have the information. You can take it from here. I don't. Denny stopped himself, started again. I don't fully understand what you found. I can see the evidence, but I can't explain the methodology well enough to... I'll write it up.
Ethan pulled the notepad from his jacket pocket, the same one from this morning, and started writing. Give me 20 minutes. He wrote for 25 minutes. It was dense and technical and organized in the way his thinking was organized. Not for elegance, but for accuracy. Each step traceable, each conclusion preceded by its evidence. He tore the pages out and handed them to Denny. Denny read through them. This is clear, but Ethan, she's going to ask questions I can't answer and then tell her to call me. He checked his watch. I have to leave in 10 minutes for school pickup. She'll want you to be there when I explain it. I know, but I have a 7-year-old who needs to be picked up at 3:15. Denny looked at him for a moment. Do you understand what you just found? Do you understand what this would mean if it came out Thursday and nobody had caught it? Yes. The contract is worth $400 million over 7 years. We lose it. We lose the company. Probably 400 jobs. Denny's voice was quiet and matter-of-fact about this, the tone of someone stating geography. And whoever did this knew that. Ethan looked at him. He knew Denny well enough to know the man wasn't manipulating him. He was just telling him the truth, which was somehow worse because it meant Ethan had to actually think about it. I'll come back tomorrow, Ethan said. I can be here by 1. I need to dig deeper into that fourth-layer sequence. There's something there I want to rule out or confirm, but today I have to go. Denny nodded. Tomorrow, 1 o'clock. Tell whoever needs to know to hold off on any system changes until I've looked at that sequence. If someone tries to manually patch the authentication layer before I confirm the scope of the modification, they could accelerate the failure instead of preventing it. I'll tell them. Make sure they actually listen. I'll make sure. Ethan stood up and picked up his jacket. He looked at the screen one more time. The graph, the pattern, the clean, deliberate fingerprint of someone who had spent weeks working quietly inside the system. It was almost impressive in a way that he felt vaguely uncomfortable admiring. One more thing, he said. Whoever did this is still watching. If the pattern changes in the next 48 hours, if the interval shifts or the modifications stop, that means they know someone's looking, so be careful who you tell. Denny's expression shifted. How careful? The access list for the management layer is 8 people, one of them or someone they talk to. So, he let that sit. Denny didn't say anything. He was doing the mental arithmetic of it, running through the names, and from the look on his face, it was not a comfortable exercise. Ethan left him to it. He made it to the school at 3:19. Sophie was on the front steps again, backpack on her lap, trying to look like she hadn't been watching for the van. 4 minutes late, she said when she got in. I know, I was working. She looked at him with the particular attention she had for changes in his demeanor. He knew she was reading him the way kids read their parents, when their parents are the primary source of information about how the world is going. The Virion thing? She asked. Yeah. Was it bad? He thought about how to answer that. It was complicated, he said, but I found what I was looking for. Is it fixable? Maybe. I have to go back tomorrow to be sure. Sophie nodded like this was acceptable. She looked out the window. Mrs. Patterson said my book report was the best in the class. I'm not surprised. She said I used complex vocabulary for my grade level. What does that mean? I used the word perspective correctly, apparently. Some kids in my class think it means a picture. Ethan laughed. Sophie smiled at the window, not at him, but she'd timed it so he could see the smile in the side mirror if he looked, which he did. Dad, she said after a minute, Yeah. You said maybe. What? You said maybe it's fixable, not probably. He glanced at her. Yeah. What's the part that makes it a maybe instead of a probably? He thought about the fourth layer authentication sequence, the thing that was bothering him about it, the piece that didn't quite fit the pattern yet. There's something I haven't figured out yet, he said. I need to look at it more before I know if it changes things. But you think you can figure it out? I think so, yeah. Sophie seemed to accept this the way she accepted his answers when he was being honest rather than reassuring, with a small nod that meant she was filing the information and would update when new data arrived. Okay, she said. He went back to the logs that night after Sophie was asleep. He'd gotten remote access from Denny, a more limited view than the on-site terminal, but enough to look at the sequence that was bothering him. He sat at the kitchen table with his notepad and his coffee going cold and spent 2 hours on it. By midnight, he had it. It was worse than he'd initially thought. The fourth layer sequence wasn't just part of the same attack pattern. It was a secondary mechanism, a failsafe built into the sabotage. If someone discovered the primary modification and tried to patch it without identifying the secondary trigger first, the act of patching would itself initiate a different cascade, the kind that would look accidental, the kind that would take days to diagnose even after the demonstration had already collapsed. Whoever had done this wasn't just technically capable, they were strategically patient. They had planned for discovery. Ethan stared at his notepad for a while. He was thinking about Thursday, about the timing of the thing, the deliberate targeting of the demonstration window, about the 8 people on the access list and the particular ugliness of someone spending weeks on a plan like this. He was also thinking about Olivia Hartwell. He couldn't fully separate the situation from her. She was the one who would lose everything if Thursday went wrong. She was also the one who had looked at him for 2 seconds and decided she knew everything she needed to know. He was aware that these 2 facts were both true simultaneously and that they were pulling in different directions inside him, and that he was going to have to figure out which one he was going to let matter more. He thought about what Sophie had said. If you can help someone and you don't because they were mean to you, that makes you the mean one now. He thought, Sophie is 7 years old and she might be more clear-headed about this than I am. He wrote up the secondary mechanism in the same dense, traceable format as the night before. He added it to the documentation. He sent it to Denny with a note. There's more. I'll explain tomorrow. Don't let anyone touch the authentication layer. I mean, anyone. Denny's reply came back in 4 minutes, which meant he was also awake at midnight, which meant he was still sleeping in his office. Jesus. Okay. Nobody touches anything. See you at 1. Ethan closed his laptop and went to bed. He lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling for a while before sleep came, listening to the sounds of the apartment, the refrigerator, the pipes, the faint television from upstairs that was apparently always on. He thought about the system. He could see its shape clearly now, the way you can see a building's skeleton once you know where to look. The sabotage was thorough and patient, and built by someone who understood the architecture of Vierion's network at a deep level. It was almost elegant, in the way that problems you haven't solved yet sometimes look elegant, before you find the solution and realize they were just difficult. He was going to find the solution. He knew that now. Not because of Olivia Hartwell, not despite her. Just because the problem was there and he could see it, and looking away from something you can see clearly was its own kind of failure. He fell asleep thinking about authentication layers, and woke up at 4:30 thinking about them still. Tuesday was overcast. The sky, the particular flat gray that sits on a city the way a lid sits on a pot. He did his morning route, delivered his packages, moved through the ordinary machinery of the day. But something had shifted in how he was carrying it. He couldn't have described the shift precisely. He was still tired, still running on margins, still counting hours. But there was a different quality to the tiredness, the kind that comes from using muscles that had gone unused for a long time, rather than from grinding down the same ones over and over. He was back downtown by 12:40. He took the parking structure again, the service elevator. Denny was waiting at the workstation. Okay, Denny said. Tell me about the secondary mechanism. Ethan told him. It took 20 minutes. Denny's face went through several things during those 20 minutes. Worry, comprehension, a brief flash of something that looked like professional respect, and then back to worry. So if we had patched the primary without knowing about this, it would have looked like the patch caused the failure, not the sabotage. Which means whoever did this knew we'd eventually find the primary. They were counting on it. The secondary is the real attack. The primary is the one they wanted us to find. Denny was quiet for a moment. That's actually kind of brilliant in a horrible way. Yeah. Can we stop it? The secondary? Yes. But it has to be done in a specific sequence. Isolate the trigger conditions first, neutralize the failsafe, then patch the primary. If you do it in the wrong order, we accelerate the failure, you said. Right. Denny rubbed his face with both hands. He had the look of someone who had processed too much information in too short a time and was trying to fit it all into a container that wasn't quite large enough. I told Olivia this morning, he said. Not all of it. I told her we'd found evidence of intentional sabotage and that we had a lead on how to address it before Thursday. Ethan kept his expression neutral. How'd she take it? She was, Denny searched for the word, controlled. The way she gets controlled when something is actually serious. She asked who found it. I told her it was you. A beat. She didn't say anything for about 5 seconds, Denny continued. Then she asked if you were still in the building. What did you tell her? I said you were coming back today at 1. He glanced at his watch. It's 12:53. I know. She's going to want to see you. I figured. Ethan? It's fine, Denny. He turned back to the screen. Let me get the sequence documented before she gets here. I want everything written down clearly enough that your team can execute it without me standing over them. Why without you? Because I might not be available Thursday afternoon. He said it matter-of-factly. I have a job. Sophie has school. I'm not Virion's employee. He heard Denny take a breath and decide not to argue. Smart man. He worked through the sequence carefully, documenting each step with the precision of someone who knows that the person following the instructions may not have the same context you do. Clear language. No assumed knowledge. Each decision point flagged with its risk and its alternative. He was on the 3rd page when he heard Denny stand up behind him. Ethan didn't turn around. He knew from the quality of the silence who had come into the room. Mr. Calloway. The voice was the same one from the lobby. Not loud. Compressed authority that preceded explanation. But there was something different in it this time. Not hesitance exactly, but a quality of restraint that had the same shape as someone choosing their words more carefully than usual. He finished the sentence he was writing. Then he turned around. Olivia Hartwell looked the same as she had in the lobby. Dark clothes, pulled back hair, the posture of someone who had learned to inhabit authority as early as other people learned to ride bikes. But she was also not quite the same. There were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there before, or that he hadn't been close enough to see. She was holding a tablet against her chest with both hands, which was the only sign of anything that wasn't entirely composed. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't expected. Not blank, not dismissive, something more complicated. The expression of someone who has prepared several versions of a conversation and isn't entirely sure which one applies. I know who you are now, she said. It wasn't an apology. It was a fact, stated with the same directness she brought to everything. I looked into it after Denny told me your name. Ethan looked at her. He didn't say anything yet. Ethan Calloway, systems architect, former principal consultant at Archway Solutions. You built the distributed infrastructure for the Henderson County Public Health Network and the Crestview Municipal Communications Grid, Grid, among other things. She paused. You were delivering specialized parts to our facilities team. You weren't loitering. No, he said. I wasn't. She held his gaze. I made a decision about you based on... She stopped, started again. I made a decision about you that was wrong, and I want to acknowledge that. It wasn't an apology in the formal sense. She hadn't said the word sorry. But she was looking at him with a directness that didn't have deflection in it, which was something. Ethan held the moment for a second. There were things he could say. He chose not to say most of them. You need this fixed by Thursday, he said instead. Something moved across her expression. Relief, maybe.
or something adjacent to it. Yes, I've documented the attack pattern and the remediation sequence.
It has to be executed in a specific order. I want to walk your lead engineer through it directly. He looked at Denny. Who's your best person on network security? Priya, Denny said without hesitation. Priya Subramaniam. Can she be here in an hour? She's in the building. I can have her here in 10 minutes. Ethan turned back to the documentation he was writing. Then let me finish this and we'll go through it together. He heard Olivia say, behind him, Thank you. He didn't turn around. He kept writing. But he nodded, once, because the words had been real, and real words deserved acknowledgement. The room was quiet except for the sound of his pen on paper, and outside the windows, the city's flat gray sky had begun to shift toward something lighter, the way overcast days sometimes do in the late afternoon when you've stopped expecting it. Priya Subramaniam arrived in 8 minutes, not 10. She was a small woman in her mid-30s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the focused energy of someone who had been running on adrenaline for several days and had stopped noticing. She came through the door already looking at Denny with a question on her face. And then she saw Ethan, and the question shifted into something more careful. This is Ethan Calloway, Denny said. He found it. Priya looked at the documentation on the screen, then at Ethan, then back at the screen. I've been staring at these logs for 6 days. I know, Ethan said. You were looking in the right place. You were looking for the wrong thing. She pulled up a chair without being invited. That was a good sign. He didn't have patience for people who needed permission to engage with a problem. Show me, she said. He showed her. He went through the attack pattern methodically, the timing intervals, the management layer modifications, the cumulative threshold. She stopped him twice to ask questions, both of which were good questions, the kind that meant she was building the picture rather than just receiving it. When he got to the secondary mechanism, she went very still. That's why patching the primary felt wrong to me, she said quietly. I kept telling Denny something felt off about it. I couldn't articulate why. Your instinct was right. You just didn't have enough data to confirm it. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the screen. Whoever built this understood our architecture. Yes, that narrows the list of people significantly. I know. They looked at each other. The implication was sitting in the room with them, heavy and specific, and neither of them said it aloud because Olivia Hartwell was standing 10 feet away and some conversations needed to happen in a different order. Ethan spent the next hour walking Priya through the remediation sequence step by step. She was quick. She made her own notes in parallel with his, adding annotations, flagging 2 points where she wanted to test an assumption before executing. He let her push back. When she pushed back with something valid, he incorporated it. When she pushed back with something that missed a dependency, he explained why, and she listened without ego, which was rarer than it should have been. Olivia stayed in the room the whole time. She didn't interrupt. She stood slightly back from the workstation and listened with the quality of attention that executives either have or don't, not performing engagement, just actually tracking the information. Ethan noticed that she asked no questions during the technical walkthrough, which meant she either understood it or had decided her role in this moment was to listen rather than demonstrate comprehension. He wasn't sure which, but either one was the right call. When they finished, Priya sat back and looked at her notes. If we execute this in sequence, she said, and we start tonight to give ourselves a margin. Start tonight, Ethan said. Don't wait until tomorrow. If the interval on the modification shortens, the threshold could move earlier than the projection. What would cause the interval to shorten? If whoever's doing this gets nervous, if they think someone's found the pattern, they might accelerate. Priya absorbed that. So we're racing. Quietly, yes. She stood up. She looked at Ethan with an expression that had directness in it and something else, not quite gratitude, more like the acknowledgement one professional extends to another when the work has been real. I'm going to get my team together and brief them this afternoon. I'll keep the group small. Keep it small, he agreed. And Priya? She turned. The person who built this is patient and careful, and they've been watching the system for weeks. When you start the remediation, be methodical. Don't rush, even if the timeline feels tight. Rushing is where you make the mistake they're counting on. She nodded once. It was a nod that meant she had heard him and would carry it. She left. The room had a different quality after she went, quieter, the particular quiet of a space where the active work has concluded and something else is about to begin. Denny stood up and stretched, his back making a sound that suggested the office couch had not been kind. There's something I need to pull from the server room. I'll be back. He said it with the specific casualness of someone creating an exit, which Ethan appreciated and also saw through immediately. Then it was just Ethan and Olivia. He started organizing his notes. He didn't do it to avoid looking at her, just because the notes needed organizing and it gave the moment somewhere to go. "You drove here from a delivery route," she said. He looked up. "Yeah." "Denny told me. You've been coming in on your lunch window." 2 hours roughly. It's enough." She was standing with her arms crossed, not defensively, more like someone who needed something to do with their hands but had decided against it. "That's not how most consultants work." "I'm not a consultant." "No." She paused. "You could be. You were." "I was a lot of things." She didn't push on that. He returned to his notes. There were a few seconds of silence that weren't exactly comfortable but weren't antagonistic either. Just two people in a room who hadn't figured out the geography of each other yet. "I read about your wife," Olivia said. His pen stopped. He looked at her. Her expression was careful, not pitying, that he would have disliked. More like someone who has learned something and is deciding how much weight to give it versus how much weight the person in front of them would want placed on it. "Claire," he said. It was just a word. Her name, a word, the most fundamental fact. "I'm sorry." It was 4 years ago. He said it the way he always said it, not to minimize, just to give it its location in time. That doesn't always make it smaller. He looked at her for a moment. That was an accurate thing to say, and he hadn't expected it from her, and he wasn't sure what to do with the small recalibration it required. "Sophie was 3 when she got sick," he said. 4 when Claire died. I left the industry 6 weeks after the funeral because the hours..." He stopped. "It wasn't sustainable." "No," she said quietly. "It wouldn't have been. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel worse about what happened in the lobby. I already feel bad about what happened in the lobby." She said it plainly, not with the theatrical weight of performed remorse, just as a statement of fact. "I made a decision about you in about 4 seconds, and it was wrong. I don't make many 4-second decisions that turn out to be that wrong. You make a lot of 4-second decisions. Yes, it's usually efficient." A pause. That day, it wasn't. Ethan put his pen down. He looked at her properly for maybe the first time. Not during the incident, not in the professional context of the last hour, but just as a person in a room. She was tired in a way she was clearly accustomed to carrying. There was something in her posture that was maintenance rather than ease. The careful construction of a person who had learned that certain positions had to be held and had been holding them for long enough that she'd stopped questioning it. She was also, he realized, younger than she looked in the lobby. Not in years. She was 30, Denny had mentioned it once, but in the sense that the performance of authority that she carried so completely left less room for whatever was underneath it. And the gap between the performance and the person was something you could see when she wasn't actively managing someone toward an outcome. "What happens if Thursday doesn't go right?" he asked. Not to twist the knife, just because the question was there. She didn't flinch. "The government contract gets delayed or pulled. The investors who've been watching the process lose confidence. We spend the next 8 months in damage control and some of them don't come back." She said it the way she'd say weather data. "About 400 jobs depend on the health of the contracts division. Not all of them immediately, but over time. And you. And the company I've spent 3 years building." She met his eyes. "Yes, and me." There was a quality of honesty in that last addition, the acknowledgement that it was personal as well as institutional, that he respected. It would have been easier to leave herself out of it. She hadn't. "Priya is good," he said. "If she follows the sequence, you'll be okay. And if something comes up that she hasn't accounted for," he picked up his pen, "then call me." He saw something shift in her expression, not relief exactly, more like the adjustment you make when you realize the ground is more solid than you expected. Why? She asked. You don't owe us anything. I don't, he agreed. But the problem is interesting, and I don't like leaving a problem half-finished. He paused. And 400 people didn't throw me out of a lobby. She absorbed that. He hadn't said it to wound her. It was just true, and she seemed to know the difference. No, she said. They didn't. He finished organizing his notes. He checked his watch. 2:40. He needed to leave in 15 minutes for Sophie's pickup. One more thing, he said. About who did this. Olivia's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Priya's going to need access to the personnel records for the 8 people on the management layer access list. She already has it. Good, but don't assume it's a current employee. She frowned. Contractor? Or a former employee who held credentials that were never fully revoked. It happens more than people want to admit. He slid one of his pages across to her. He'd written a name, not a person's name, but a specific credential identifier he'd found in the log data, a ghost string that appeared in 4 of the modification entries and shouldn't have been there at all. That identifier comes from an access tier that predates your current system. Someone kept a thread open when the infrastructure was updated. She looked at the identifier. Her jaw tightened very slightly. You know it, he said. It wasn't a question. I recognize the format. It's from the previous administration's infrastructure. Before I took over. She looked up. That access should have been wiped 18 months ago. Should have been. Someone didn't finish the job. Or decided not to. They looked at each other. The room was quiet. This goes beyond the technical team, she said. Yes, you're going to need your legal and security teams involved, carefully. She nodded. She was thinking, he could see it, the way her attention went slightly internal while remaining focused. It was the same thing he did, actually, the outward stillness that meant active processing. He noticed the similarity and set it aside. I have to go, he said. I know, your daughter. He stood, gathered his notepad, put on his jacket. He looked at the room, Denny's workstation, the screens with their logs and patterns, the window with its altered rectangle of gray sky. Ethan? He turned. She was still standing in the same position, arms crossed, but something had changed in how she was holding herself, a fraction less constructed. For what it's worth, she said, the man I told security to remove last Tuesday was not the man I should have removed. I want you to know that I understand that. He held her gaze for a moment. And the man you actually removed? She didn't look away. Was also not someone I should have removed. I should have found out who he was before I made a call. It was the closest she'd gotten to a real apology. Not the formal acknowledgement from earlier, but this. The admission that even without knowing who he was, the decision had been wrong. The jacket and the handcart and the coffee on the floor had not, in themselves, added up to removal. She knew that now. She was telling him she knew it. He nodded once. I'll be back tomorrow if Priya runs into anything. I hope you won't need to be. Me too. He left through the service elevator. In the parking structure, the air was cooler than upstairs, concrete and exhaust, and the particular stillness of underground spaces. He walked to the van and got in and sat for a moment with his hands on the steering wheel. He thought about Claire. He thought about the way Olivia had said that doesn't always make it smaller. He thought about the credential identifier in the log and the thread left deliberately open and the patience of someone who plans for months and waits and watches and the specific kind of damage that kind of patience could do. He started the van. He had 11 minutes to make it to school pickup. He made it in 9. Sophie was on the steps, backpack, looking, not looking. You're early, she said when she got in. Don't get used to it. She buckled her seatbelt. How did it go? Better than yesterday. Better how? He pulled out of the school zone into the afternoon traffic. I found the rest of what I was looking for. The maybe is more like a probably now. That's good. Yeah. She was quiet for a moment, watching the street. Then, did you see her? The CEO woman? He glanced at her. Yeah. Was she mean again? He thought about it.
No, she was different. Different how? He considered how to describe it to a 7-year-old. She looked at me like a person this time, instead of like a problem. Sophie seemed to weigh this. Is that enough? It was a good question, the kind of question that had more than one answer depending on what you were measuring. I don't know yet, he said honestly. Sophie nodded with the filing expression. Information received, judgment reserved. Can we have the pasta again tonight? She asked. We had it 2 nights ago. I know, I still want it. Sure, he said. We can have the pasta. Checked. Wednesday passed in the particular way that days pass when you're waiting for something to resolve. Each hour both longer and shorter than it should be, time behaving strangely around a fixed point ahead of it. Ethan did his route. He kept his phone close. Priya texted him at 11 in the morning. Started the sequence last night. First phase complete. No anomalies yet. Will update. He texted back. Good. Watch the trigger conditions on phase 2 before you execute. Don't rush it. Her reply was just a thumbs up. He trusted her. At 2 in the afternoon, a second text from Denny. Legal and security teams are in. The credential identifier you found. Olivia recognized the person it belongs to, former VP of Infrastructure. Left the company 14 months ago, apparently not on great terms. HR is pulling his exit records. Ethan read the message twice. A former VP with a grudge and a thread left open in the access permissions. It was ugly and familiar, the specific ugliness of insider threats. Not some external adversary, but someone who had sat in the same meetings, used the same coffee machine, known the same people. He typed back, keep the circle small until you know the scope. If he had help inside, you don't want to spook anyone. Denny. Olivia is already 3 steps ahead on that. She's been on the phone with outside counsel since this morning. He put his phone in his pocket and finished his afternoon route. He picked up Sophie. He made the pasta. He helped her with a worksheet on multiplication that she didn't really need help with, but asked for anyway, which he understood was less about the multiplication and more about sitting at the table together, which was a thing she sometimes needed without being able to name it. He understood it because he sometimes needed it too. At 9 that evening, Priya called. Phase 2 is done, she said. Her voice had the careful, flat quality of someone managing relief. Failsafe is neutralized. The secondary trigger is gone. We're moving to the primary patch now. Any complications? 1. Midway through Phase 2, I found a third modification, smaller than the first 2, almost invisible. Same pattern, different layer. I almost missed it. But you didn't. No, because I wasn't rushing. A pause. Like you said. Good. If we'd move faster. You didn't, he said. That's what matters. Right. Another pause, longer this time. Ethan, thank you. Genuinely. He didn't know what to do with that, so he said, how long until the primary patch is complete? 2 hours, maybe 3. We'll have it done well before morning. Then you'll be ready for Thursday. We'll be ready. He hung up. He sat in the quiet apartment, Sophie asleep, the city doing its nighttime thing outside the window. He felt something that wasn't quite satisfaction, more like the specific release that comes when a system that was about to fail doesn't, when the thing you could see coming gets diverted at the last possible angle. He thought about Thursday, the demonstration, $400 million, and the 400 jobs that would follow it if it went right. The former VP of Infrastructure sitting somewhere tonight, watching his plan not go the way he intended. He thought about Olivia Hartwell in that 4th-floor room, saying that doesn't always make it smaller. Saying even without knowing who he was, saying it and meaning it. He didn't know what to do with any of that yet. He set it aside the way he set aside incomplete problems, not dismissed, just given room to become clear in its own time. He went to bed. Outside, somewhere in the city's fiber and metal and glass, Priya's team was finishing the work. The network was being healed one careful step at a time, the way the only things worth healing ever are. Thursday was 17 hours away.
Ethan woke up Thursday knowing something was wrong before he could identify what. It was 5:45. His alarm wasn't set until 6:15. He lay still for a moment, listening to the apartment, trying to locate the thing that had pulled him out of sleep. Nothing obvious. Sophie's door was closed. The refrigerator was humming. The building's pipes were doing their morning work. Just the ordinary sounds. He checked his phone. 4 messages from Denny sent between 2 and 4 in the morning. He read them in sequence. The first, at 2:12. Primary patch complete. Priya says we're clean, getting some rest before tomorrow. The second, at 3:47, Ethan. Call me when you see this. The third, at 3:51. Network's down. Not the attack. Something else. Different failure mode entirely. Can't reach Priya. She's not answering. The fourth, at 4:08. Still down. This is not what we fixed. This is something new. Ethan sat up. He called Denny. Denny picked up on his first ring, which meant he hadn't slept. Talk, Ethan said. At 3:30, 90 minutes after Priya signed off on the patch, the primary authentication server went offline. Not a cascade failure, not the secondary mechanism. It's a direct shutdown, clean and complete, like someone walked up to the hardware and pulled it. Did someone walk up to the hardware and pull it? The server room access log shows a badge entry at 3:17. The badge belongs to Marcus Webb. Ethan went still. Who is Marcus Webb? Junior network administrator. Been with the company 2 years. He's the one who... Ethan, he was on Priya's remediation team last night. She brought him in for the Phase 2 execution because she needed an extra set of hands. The silence that followed was the kind that comes when several things connect at once. He's the inside contact, Ethan said. We think so. He's not answering his phone and he's not at his apartment. We had security go there an hour ago. What's the current state of the network? Offline, completely. The demonstration is at 2 this afternoon. We have 8 hours and we have no authentication layer. What about the backup server? We have one. It's in the secondary infrastructure room on the 6th floor, but when I tried to bring it online 30 minutes ago, it wouldn't initialize. I don't know why. I do, Ethan said. He was already out of bed, moving toward the kitchen table where his notepad was. There was a 4th modification in the logs that I hadn't fully traced. I saw it Wednesday morning and flagged it as a lower priority because it was so small. I think Webb planted a dormant disable sequence in the backup server's initialization protocol before Priya started the remediation. He knew we'd go to the backup if the primary went down. A long silence. So our primary is physically shut down and our backup won't start? Yes. And the demonstration is in 8 hours? Yes. Denny's voice, when it came, was very quiet. Can you fix it? Ethan was at the kitchen table, flipping through the notepad. He found the page where he'd made a note about the 4th modification. 3 lines of cramped shorthand, flagged with a question mark. He looked at it. He'd been right to flag it. He'd been wrong to deprioritize it. The backup initialization issue. Yes, I can fix that. I need access to the 6th floor server room and I need to be there in person, not remote. He was doing the math in his head. The primary shutdown is physical. Can your facilities team get into the hardware? They can, but they don't know what they're looking at. I do. Get your best facilities person and your best hardware tech and have them meet me there. I need to be on site by 7:30. What about your route? It was a reasonable question. He had a job. He had deliveries scheduled. He had a supervisor who needed 8 hours notice for a last-minute absence. He also had 8 hours before 400 people's jobs either did or didn't exist. I'll figure it out, he said. 7:30. Have the rooms open and the people ready. He hung up. He called Carol at the depot. She picked up on the 4th ring, voice thick with early morning. I need the day, he said. Personal emergency. I know it's short notice. A pause. How short? I'm calling you at 5:52 in the morning. Carol made the sound she made when she was exhaling through her nose at something. Ethan? I know, I'll cover whoever they pull for my route on the weekend. 2 shifts? Your choice. It's not about the shifts. Are you okay? Is Sophie okay? We're both fine. It's complicated. I'll explain when I can. Another pause, longer. Go. I'll move your stops. Thank you. He went to Sophie's door. He opened it carefully. She was asleep on her side with one arm wrapped around a stuffed elephant that she'd had since she was 2 and nominally considered herself too old for, but had never actually given up. The room had its particular smell, kid and clean laundry, and the faint sweetness of the lotion Mrs. Okafor always brought when she came over. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He thought about waking her and then decided against it. He texted Mrs. Okafor. "Emergency came up. Can you be here by 7 to get Sophie to school? I'll explain later, and I owe you." Then he went to the kitchen and made coffee and ate a piece of bread standing at the counter and changed into the cleanest work clothes he had and was in the van by 6:47. Virion Systems at 7 in the morning looked different than it did in the afternoon. The lobby was quieter, the staff thinner, the glass walls showing a city that hadn't fully woken up. Ethan came through the parking structure again out of habit. Denny was waiting at the service elevator, and beside him was a woman Ethan didn't recognize. 50s, work clothes, the sturdy practical look of someone who spent her days in mechanical rooms, and a younger man with a laptop bag and the specific anxiety of someone who had been told something was very wrong and been given very little context. "Ethan, this is Rosa from facilities and Kevin from hardware support," Denny said. "Have either of you been in the primary server room in the last 2 hours?" Ethan asked. "No," Rosa said. "We were waiting on your call." "Good. Don't touch anything in there until I've looked at the shutdown sequence. Kevin, I need you to pull the initialization logs from the backup server before we go anywhere near the hardware. Can you do that remotely?" "Yeah, if I have the credentials." "Denny." Denny handed Kevin a printed credential sheet. Kevin sat down at the nearest available terminal and started working. Ethan stood behind him and watched the logs populate on the screen. He found the planted sequence in 4 minutes. It was small, expertly hidden, exactly the kind of thing that looked like a routine startup parameter until you knew what you were looking for. "There," he said. He pointed at a specific line in the initialization chain. "That parameter is set to call a null authentication check that will always return a failed state. The server tries to initialize, hits that check, reads a failure, and shuts itself down. Loops every 30 seconds. Kevin stared at it. I wouldn't have found that for hours." "I know." Ethan straightened up. "Here's how we remove it." He talked Kevin through it step by step. Kevin was careful, which was the main thing Ethan needed from him. Not fast, not brilliant, just careful and willing to ask when he wasn't sure. They moved through the sequence in 25 minutes. When Kevin ran the initialization again, the backup server came online with a sound that was objectively unremarkable, a low electronic hum, a series of status lights going green, but which produced in Denny a visible physical reaction, like someone had released a pressure valve. "Okay," Denny said. "Okay, the backup is up." "Don't celebrate yet," Ethan said. "The backup has about 60% of the authentication capacity of the primary. If your demonstration requires full network load, you'll have latency issues. We need the primary back too." "How long?" "Depends on what Webb did when he shut it down. Let's go look." The primary server room was in the sub-basement, which was why Denny had had no signal that first Tuesday when the anomalies started. It was a long, cool room with the particular sound of serious infrastructure, the white noise of cooling systems, the steady respiration of machines carrying large amounts of information. Everything was normal until the back wall, where the primary authentication cluster sat, and where Marcus Webb had spent approximately 12 minutes at 3:17 in the morning doing something very deliberate. Rosa walked the physical hardware with Ethan. She knew the room better than anyone, the routing of the cables, the layout of the clusters, which panels accessed which systems. She pointed, and he looked, and together they traced what Webb had done. He'd been careful. He hadn't destroyed anything, which told Ethan something about the plan. This wasn't rage, it wasn't vandalism. Webb had done exactly enough damage to create a timed failure, the kind that would look like a catastrophic equipment fault rather than sabotage. If no one had known to look for it, the investigation afterward would have taken days. The demonstration would have failed. By the time anyone established that it was an equipment failure, the contract would be gone. He disconnected 4 physical authentication nodes, Ethan said, but he didn't damage them. They're right here. He pointed to a shelf where 4 drives sat in a neat row, separated from their housings. He just pulled them. Rosa looked at the drives. Can we reinstall them? Yes, but not at random. If we reinstall them in the wrong sequence, the cluster will read conflicting configuration states and create exactly the cascade failure the network was originally being set up for. He looked at Rosa. Do you have the original installation documentation for this cluster? In the facilities office. Paper copies from when it was built, about 4 years ago. Get them. She went. Ethan stayed in the server room with the 4 drives and the hum of the cooling systems and the particular cold focus that came to him in rooms like this one. The kind of focus that wasn't forced, that was just there when the problem was real. Kevin appeared in the doorway. The backup is holding. Priya just ran a test auth sequence and it passed. Good. How long until the demonstration? Kevin checked his watch. 6 hours and 20 minutes. Then we have time if we move cleanly. Ethan looked at the empty drive housings. Get Priya down here when Rosa gets back with the documentation. I need her to verify the sequence before we execute. Kevin disappeared. Ethan stood in the cold room and waited, and thought about Marcus Webb. The 2 years of employment, the careful positioning on Priya's team, the patience of someone who had built and waited and adapted when the primary plan was neutralized. Webb hadn't panicked when the remediation team started their work the night before. He'd activated a contingency. He'd been ready. That kind of readiness didn't happen alone. Webb was a junior administrator. He was good, but the architecture of the original sabotage was beyond his level. He'd been the hands. Someone else had been the mind, the former VP of infrastructure, the one Olivia had recognized from the credential identifier, 14 months out of the company, apparently not on great terms. Ethan filed it and moved on. It wasn't his investigation to run. Rosa returned with a thick folder of printed documentation. Priya arrived 2 minutes later, still in the same clothes she'd been wearing the night before, with the look of someone who had been running on coffee and will for too many consecutive hours. She saw Ethan, and something in her expression settled. "You're here," she said. "You thought I wouldn't be?" "I didn't know." She looked at the 4 drives on the shelf. "Webb." "Yeah. I brought him in. I trusted him." Her voice was flat, not emotional. The flatness of someone who has already done the emotional part privately and arrived at the controlled version. "You had no reason not to," Ethan said. "He's been careful for 2 years." "Still." "Priya." He waited until she looked at him. "You found the 3rd modification last night because you were being thorough. You saved Thursday with that. Don't spend the morning being hard on yourself about Webb. Spend it on the reinstallation sequence." She looked at him for a moment. Then she opened the documentation folder. "Show me what you're thinking." They worked for 3 hours. The reinstallation wasn't complicated so much as demanding. Each decision point had to be confirmed against the documentation, each node verified before the next was connected, the configuration sequence executed in exact order. Rosa handled the physical installation with a steadiness that Ethan appreciated. She moved carefully and didn't assume, which was the only thing he'd asked of her. Kevin managed the software side, verifying each node's authentication handshake as it came online. Priya watched the system state in real time and called out each verification. She and Ethan developed a working shorthand within the first 30 minutes. Half sentences that carried complete meaning, the compression that happens when 2 people are tracking the same problem with the same level of attention. It wasn't seamless. They disagreed twice, both times about configuration priorities, and both times they worked through it with the slightly tense practicality of people who don't have time for disagreement to become anything larger than a problem to solve. By 10:45, all 4 nodes were reinstalled and online. By 11:10, the primary authentication cluster was running its diagnostic sequence. By 11:30, it reported clean. The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds. Then Kevin said quietly, "We're up." Denny, who had been in and out of the server room the entire morning and was currently standing in the doorway with a phone pressed against his chest, looked at the status panel. He looked at Ethan. "Both systems? Primary and backup?" "Both systems. Primary is restored to full capacity. Backup is in warm standby." Ethan closed the documentation folder. "Run your full test sequence. Don't assume. Verify every authentication pathway before 2 o'clock." "We will." Denny had the look of someone who had been underwater for a week and had just broken the surface. "Ethan, run the tests," Ethan said. Not unkindly. Denny almost smiled. He turned and started making calls.
Ethan stood in the server room in the sudden relative quiet, the hum of the machines continuing their indifferent work, and felt the particular tiredness that comes after sustained concentration. His back hurt. His coffee had been a long time ago. He had been in this building since 7:30 in the morning, and it was now close to noon, and he had eaten one piece of bread before 6. Rosa was putting away the tools she'd used, doing it with the methodical care of someone who believed in returning things to their proper state. Kevin was typing something on his laptop. Priya was leaning against the far wall with her eyes closed, not asleep, the posture of someone letting the adrenaline drain. "Priya," Ethan said. She opened her eyes. "Go home and sleep before the demonstration. You don't need to be here for the testing phase. Kevin and Denny can handle that. You did the hard part." "I should stay." "Why?" She thought about it. She didn't have a good answer. "Go home," he said again. "Come back at 1:30. You'll be sharper." She pushed off from the wall. She looked at him with an expression that was tired and complicated and had something honest in it. "You came back," she said, "after what they did to you in the lobby. You didn't have to." "I know. I just want you to know that I see that." He nodded once. She left. He stood in the server room alone for a moment, listening to the machines. He found Olivia on the 15th floor. He hadn't gone looking for her. He'd been heading toward the service elevator, intending to leave, get food, figure out the rest of his day. But the elevator opened on 15 instead of the lobby, and through the glass wall of the corridor he could see her in a conference room, alone, standing at the window with her back to the door and her arms crossed, and the posture of someone who has temporarily allowed themselves to be something other than composed. He almost kept walking. It wasn't his floor, wasn't his business. He knocked on the glass. She turned. For a fraction of a second before the professional bearing reassembled itself, he saw something unguarded. The face of someone who had been quietly holding a very heavy thing and had not been letting anyone see them do it. She opened the conference room door. "The network is up," he said. "Both systems. Full capacity. Priya's team will run the verification sequence, and you should be clear for 2 o'clock. She looked at him. She absorbed this. He watched something move through her face that wasn't relief exactly. More like the complicated feeling you have when a disaster has been averted and the aversion itself has cost something. "Marcus Webb," she said. "Yes." "He's been with the company 2 years." "I know." "My security team is working with law enforcement. They think they know how to find him." She paused. "And the man behind him, Gavin Reese, former VP of Infrastructure. He left 14 months ago after I restructured the division. He'd been here 12 years. Her voice was even. "He thought he was irreplaceable. I replaced him. He kept a thread open in the access permissions. He spent 14 months planning this." She said it the way you say something you're still processing. 14 months. "While I was building the contracts division, while we were working toward Thursday, he was just waiting." Ethan didn't say anything. There wasn't much to say about it that would be useful. "Did you know it was that deep when you first looked at the logs?" she asked. "I knew it was deliberate. I didn't know the scope until the layers added up. If you hadn't found the secondary mechanism, Priya would have patched the primary and triggered it. And we would have crashed during the demonstration, and the investigation afterward would have found evidence of a bad patch, and my team would have been blamed for equipment failure that was actually sabotage." She said it as a sequence of facts, not as drama. "We would have lost the contract and probably the company, and Gavin Reese would have watched it from somewhere else." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the conference room window, the city was doing its midday business, all its movement visible from 15 floors up. "Why did you come back?" she asked. It was the same question Priya had been asking, but from Olivia it had a different weight. Not gratitude, not incomprehension. Something more direct. Ethan leaned against the doorframe. He thought about how to answer honestly without making it larger than it was. "My daughter told me that not helping someone because they hurt you makes you the hurt one again." He paused. "She's 7. She has clearer thinking than most adults I know." Something shifted in Olivia's expression. "She sounds remarkable." "She is. She also negotiates bedtime with a level of precision that I find genuinely impressive." The corner of Olivia's mouth moved.
It wasn't quite a smile, but it was in that direction, and it was the first time he'd seen her face do anything that wasn't controlled, and it was something. He filed it.
I need to ask you something, he said, and you don't have to answer. She waited. When you looked at me in the lobby last Tuesday, did you actually think I was a problem, or did you just decide I was? She held his gaze. The question sat between them. I decided, she said. I didn't think. I looked at the situation and I made a fast call because I had 40 things happening, and one of them was a man standing in my lobby who didn't look like he had a reason to be there. I had a reason. I know, I didn't ask. She looked at him steadily. That's the part I keep returning to. Not that I was wrong about you specifically, that I didn't ask. He nodded slowly. In 3 years running this company, she continued, I have made a lot of fast calls. Most of them have been right. Some of them have been wrong, and I found out later. This one, she stopped. This one I found out about in an embarrassingly direct way. Yes, he said, you did.
There was a frankness between them now that hadn't been there before. Not comfort. They didn't know each other well enough for comfort. But a kind of honest ground that was different from the managed distance of their first real conversation. I owe you more than an acknowledgement, she said. You've saved this company twice in 4 days, as a favor, while working a full-time job and raising a daughter alone. You don't owe me anything. Ethan, what I did here was interesting to me. The problem was real, and I could see it, and it's enough of a reason. He straightened from the doorframe. The demonstration is in 2 hours. You should be getting ready. She looked at him for a moment longer. Will you stay? For the demonstration? He hadn't expected that. He looked at her, trying to read what was underneath the question. Whether it was professional, whether it was something else, whether it mattered which. I have to pick up my daughter at 3:15, he said. The demonstration should be done by 3. He thought about it. There was no practical reason to stay. Priya's team had what they needed, the network was clean, his presence wasn't required. There was also no particular reason not to. I'll stay, he said. He ate a vending machine sandwich on the 4th floor because it was what was available, and he was actually hungry enough that it didn't matter. He sat with Denny while Priya's team ran the final verification sequence, watching the authentication pathways come up clean one by one. Each green indicator was unremarkable on its own. Together they added up to Thursday being what it was supposed to be. At 1:45, the government delegation arrived. Ethan watched them come through the lobby on the security monitor. 6 people in good suits, the specific walk of people who have been many places and assessed many things and are ready to assess another. At 1:58, the demonstration began. Ethan didn't watch it from the room. He didn't need to. He sat in the 4th floor workspace with a cup of coffee that was better than the vending machine sandwich and read through the notes he'd made over the past 4 days, checking his own reasoning, looking for anything he'd missed. He didn't find anything. The system was clean. The sequence had been executed correctly. At 2:47, Denny came through the door with his phone in his hand and the look on his face that Ethan had been waiting to see. They're signing the letter of intent, Denny said. Right now, upstairs. Ethan nodded. 400 million over 7 years. Denny sat down heavily in the chair across from him. He was not a man who cried easily, but his eyes were doing something that was adjacent to it. We almost lost everything today. Twice. But you didn't. Because of you. Because of Priya, Ethan said. She executed it. I just showed her where to look. Denny looked at him with the expression of a man who wanted to argue and didn't have the energy. She said exactly the same thing about you. Ethan checked his watch. 2:51, 24 minutes until school pickup. He stood up and put on his jacket. He picked up his notepad. Go home and sleep, he said to Denny. I'm going to, Denny stood. He put out his hand. Ethan shook it. They looked at each other the way old friends do when something real has happened and neither of them is quite sure how to hold it. Thank you, Denny said. Call me for lunch sometime, somewhere that isn't a vending machine. He was almost at the elevator when Olivia's voice came from behind him, from the direction of the stairwell door. Ethan? He turned. She was still in the clothes from this morning, slightly less composed than she'd been on the 15th floor, which he was beginning to understand was as close as she got to relaxed. She was holding her phone. She had the look of someone who has just come from a room where something significant happened and hasn't fully processed it yet. "They signed," she said. "I heard. I wanted to She stopped. She seemed briefly at a loss for words, which he suspected was not a common state for her. "I wanted you to know, before you left." He looked at her. The elevator was behind him. He had 22 minutes. "Congratulations," he said. And he meant it, not without complication, not without the awareness of everything else, but sincerely. He meant it. She held his gaze. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to consider it seriously. Okay? Let me take you and your daughter to dinner, not as a business thing, not a thank you event, not a company function. Just dinner, the three of us." She said it with the particular evenness of someone who has decided to ask a direct thing and is committed to the directness even when it makes them uncomfortable. "I want to meet her. I want to understand who it is I've been dismissing without knowing." He considered it. He thought about Sophie positioning her succulent in the morning light. He thought about the book report on complexity and perspective. "She'll interrogate you," he said. "She asks a lot of questions." "Good," Olivia said. "I could stand to be on the receiving end of some questions." He looked at her for another moment. "Saturday," he said. "Not too late. She has a bedtime I'm contractually obligated to enforce." "Saturday," she agreed. He turned toward the elevator. He pressed the button. The doors opened immediately, which never happened, and he got in. In the lobby below, the government delegation was still somewhere in the building, signing letters of intent. The polished floor was the same floor it had always been. The reception desk was the same stone. The elevator doors closed, and Ethan Calloway went to pick up his daughter. Sophie found out about the dinner on Friday morning. Ethan had intended to bring it up Thursday evening, over the pasta she'd requested again. In the calm, unhurried way, he tried to introduce things that required her to process. But Thursday evening, he'd been so tired that dinner had involved him sitting at the kitchen table staring at his fork for approximately 2 minutes before Sophie said, "Dad, you're doing the stare thing." And he'd laughed and told her about the day in broad strokes, the network, the sabotage, the demonstration. And by the time he'd finished, she'd been asking questions about how server authentication worked and whether the bad guy had gotten caught yet, and the dinner subject hadn't come up. He told her Friday morning while she was eating cereal. "She wants to have dinner with us," he said. "Saturday. The CEO from the company." Sophie's spoon stopped in the bowl. She looked at him with the particular attention she reserved for information that required careful handling. "The one who kicked you out," she said. "She didn't technically—" He stopped. "Yes." "Why?" "She wants to say thank you, I think, and she wants to meet you." Sophie considered this. She ate another spoonful of cereal. "Why does she want to meet me?" "I told her you had a lot of questions." "And she wants to meet me anyway?" She said that sounded good. Sophie thought about it for the remainder of her cereal. Then she put the bowl in the sink and turned around with an expression that meant she'd reached a conclusion. "Okay," she said, "but I want to pick the restaurant." He had not seen that coming. "Why?" "Because she kicked you out. We should at least get to pick the restaurant." The logic was so sound that he didn't argue with it. Sophie picked a Vietnamese restaurant on Federal Boulevard called Pho Ten that she'd been to once with Mrs. Okafor and had talked about with a frequency that suggested it had made a deep impression. It was not the kind of place a CEO typically got taken to as a thank you dinner. Plastic chairs, laminated menus, a water dispenser on the counter you served yourself from. The food was excellent. The lighting was fluorescent. Ethan texted Olivia the address Saturday afternoon. Her reply came back in 2 minutes. "I'll be there at 6. No hesitation, no counter-suggestion." He appreciated that. He and Sophie arrived at 5:55. Sophie was wearing her good shoes, which she'd requested to wear, and her hair was in the 2 braids she allowed only for what she deemed important occasions. She carried herself into the restaurant with the energy of someone arriving prepared, which Ethan found both endearing and slightly intimidating. They got a table by the window. Sophie studied the menu with the focus of someone who had already decided what she wanted, but believed in due diligence. Ethan drank water and watched the door. Olivia arrived at 6:02. She came through the door in jeans and a dark jacket, no blazer, hair down rather than pulled back, a version of herself that was clearly not the lobby version, not the conference room version. She was looking for their table, and when she found it, her eyes went immediately to Sophie. Sophie was already looking at her. They looked at each other for a long moment while Olivia walked over. Ethan stood briefly. Olivia said, "Please don't," with a gesture, and he sat back down. "Hi," Olivia said, directing it at Sophie. "Hi," Sophie said. "I'm Sophie. I picked the restaurant because you kicked my dad out." Ethan closed his eyes briefly, but Olivia's expression did the thing he'd glimpsed once on the 15th floor. Something genuinely unguarded, somewhere between startled and amused and something harder to name. She pulled out the chair across from Sophie and sat down. "That's fair," she said. Sophie studied her. "He said you said sorry." "I did, though sorry doesn't really cover it." "What covers it?" "I'm not sure yet," Olivia said. "I thought dinner might be a start." Sophie appeared to weigh this. "Okay," she said, and returned to her menu with the air of someone who has completed a necessary formality. Ethan looked at Olivia. She looked back at him. Something passed between them that was close to mutual relief. The dinner moved in the way dinners do when the initial tension breaks into something more real. Sophie ordered a large bowl of pho and ate it with a seriousness of purpose. Olivia ordered the same after Sophie recommended it, and ate it with somewhat less elegance and what appeared to be genuine appreciation. The restaurant filled up around them with the Saturday evening crowd, families and couples and groups of friends, and the fluorescent lighting did what it always did and nobody cared. Sophie asked Olivia about her job with the directness of a child who has not yet learned that adults prefer the polite version of questions. "Do you actually know how computers work, or do you just tell other people to fix them?" Olivia, to her credit, didn't flinch. "Both," she said. "I understand how they work, but I'm not the best person in the room at fixing them. That's why I hire people who are." "My dad's better at fixing them than telling people to fix them." "I know," Olivia said. "I've noticed. He used to have a really important job before my mom got sick." The table got slightly quieter. Ethan watched Olivia, watched her navigate the moment. The impulse to express sympathy and the awareness that sympathy offered too quickly to a child about their parent is often about the adult's discomfort rather than the child's need. "Your dad told me a little about that," Olivia said carefully. "He left because of me," Sophie said. Matter of fact. Not sad, just stating geography. "So I could have someone home." "Yeah." "He doesn't talk about it like it was a sacrifice. He talks about it like it was just what he did." Sophie looked at her bowl. "I know it was both." Ethan kept his eyes on the window. This was territory Sophie covered on her own schedule, and he'd learned a long time ago that inserting himself into it, trying to soften it or redirect it, was the wrong move. She was working something out. She did that in conversation with real people because she was her mother's daughter in that specific way. "That sounds about right," Olivia said quietly. "Do you have kids?" "No." "Do you want them?" "Sophie," Ethan said. "It's a normal question. It's also very personal." Olivia looked at Sophie. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I haven't had much time to think about it. My company takes up most of what I have." "My dad says that's lonely." "He said that?" "Not about you specifically." Sophie tilted her head. "He said people who put all their time into work are usually lonely. He said he used to be like that before Mom." Olivia was quiet for a moment. Ethan was studying his own bowl with intense focus. "He's probably right," Olivia said. "Are you lonely?" "Sophie, what?" "She said she doesn't know if she wants kids. That's a lonely person answer." There was a silence. Then Olivia made a sound that was unmistakably a laugh. Short, real, caught off guard. Not polished or performed, just the actual thing. "I spend a lot of time alone," Olivia said to Sophie, in the tone of someone deciding to answer honestly. "I have people around me all day, but most of them are there because of my position. That's different from... It's different." Sophie nodded. She seemed satisfied with this answer in a way she hadn't been satisfied until it was real. My dad has that problem too sometimes, she said. Except with him, it's the opposite. He has me and Mrs. Okafor and Denny sometimes, but almost nobody his own age. Sophie, we've talked about sharing other people's business. You share my business all the time. I don't. You told Mrs. Okafor about the multiplication worksheet. That was a positive thing. It was still my business. Olivia was watching this exchange with an expression that was fully, genuinely entertained. When Sophie turned back to her bowl, apparently satisfied with having made her point, Olivia met Ethan's eyes across the table and her expression said, "She's extraordinary," and his said, "I know, and I also can't control her," and they both looked away at the same time. The walkout happened the following Monday. Not planned, not by Ethan anyway. Virion's legal team had moved quickly on the Reese and Webb investigation. Outside counsel, law enforcement, the kind of coordinated response that a company deploys when the threat has been definitively identified and the primary concern shifts from containment to accountability. Gavin Reese had been located in Tucson, Arizona of all places, apparently living a very normal-seeming life while a plan he'd spent 14 months building collapsed 1,200 miles away. Marcus Webb had turned himself in early Friday morning, which surprised everyone and probably surprised no one who understood the specific arithmetic of being 26 years old and facing the alternative. Ethan knew most of this because Denny texted him updates the way Denny did most things, frequently and with more detail than strictly necessary. What Ethan didn't know until Monday afternoon was that Olivia had called a company-wide meeting for that morning. He found out because Denny called him at 12:40 while he was eating lunch in his van between stops. "Did you know about the meeting?" Denny asked. "What meeting?" "She called everyone in, the whole company, all hands, the main conference hall on 11 o'clock. For what?" "She talked about the sabotage, the investigation, what happened Thursday." A pause. "And then she talked about you." Ethan stopped eating. "What do you mean she talked about me?" "I mean she stood up in front of 437 employees and told them what happened in the lobby 2 weeks ago. Exactly what happened. She didn't soften it. She didn't frame it favorably. She just said it. Said she made a snap judgment about a man based on how he looked and how he was dressed and what he was doing in the building, and that she had him removed without finding out who he was or why he was there." Ethan was quiet. "She said it was wrong," Denny continued. "Not that she was misled or that she didn't have enough information. She said she made a choice to not get enough information, and that the choice was wrong, and that the same man she dismissed came back and saved the company because—" He stopped. "She said he came back because his 7-year-old daughter has better judgment than most executives she knows." Ethan put his sandwich down. "There was a silence," Denny said. "One of those real ones where you can tell 400 people are actually thinking. And then she said she wanted to be the kind of company that earns the people it has and doesn't take the people it already threw away." Another pause. "Ethan, people were— It wasn't nothing." He stared through the windshield at the building in front of him. A law firm, one of his regular stops, the same loading dock he used every Monday. "Why are you telling me this?" he said. His voice came out slightly rough. "Because she asked me to. She said she wanted you to know, and she said she was going to call you herself, but she wanted me to tell you first so it didn't come from nowhere." "Tell me what, exactly?" "That she wants to offer you a position, formally, through actual HR, with an actual contract and actual compensation. Head of the company's Innovation and Infrastructure Division. It doesn't exist yet. She said she'd build it around you and what you actually want to do." Denny's voice was careful. "She's not trying to buy an apology. I need you to hear that. I've known her for 3 years. This is her being. She sees what you are, and she wants it where it can do the most." Ethan sat in his van for a long moment. Through the loading dock door, he could see one of the building's staff coming to meet him, checking the manifest. "I have a delivery," he said. "I know. I'll tell her you'll call her." "Yeah." He paused. "Denny." "Yeah." "The meeting. Did she, He stopped. He wasn't sure what he was asking. "She was good," Denny said simply. "She stood up there and didn't make herself the hero of the story. She made you the hero of the story. That's not easy to do. Ethan got out of the van and went to do his delivery, Sheptotramas. He called Olivia that evening after Sophie was asleep. She picked up on the second ring. Hi. Hi. He was at the kitchen table, the usual stack of papers, the window with the frame that didn't close quite right. Denny told me about the meeting. I know, I asked him to. Why the whole company? Because the whole company saw what I did. Security walked you through a lobby full of employees. Her voice was even. I couldn't undo that privately. It wouldn't have been honest. He thought about that. And the offer. Yes. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, she said. That's not why I'm doing it. A pause. What you did for this company in 4 days, the analysis, the methodology, the way you worked with Priya, that's not delivery work. I'm not saying that to diminish what you do. I'm saying there's a specific thing you're built for, and it's not what you're currently doing. I left that world for a reason. Sophie's 7 now. She's not 3. She said it gently, not as a pressure, just a fact she was placing on the table. The reason you left might still be real, or it might have a different shape now. He looked at the kitchen ceiling. Claire had picked the paint color. He'd been meaning to repaint for 2 years and kept not doing it. The hours, he started. Negotiable. I mean that. Whatever you need for school pickup, for sick days, for the things that come up, I'm not asking you to give me the same thing you gave the industry before. I'm asking you to show up the way you actually can. She paused. I've watched you work under extreme conditions with very little sleep eating a vending machine sandwich, and you were still better than most people I have on full salary. I'd like to see what you can do with actual resources. He was quiet for a moment. What would the role actually look like? Honestly, we'd figure it out together. The infrastructure division needs leadership that can see problems the way you see them. The innovation side, but we've been trying to build something for 2 years, and we keep hiring people who think in straight lines. You don't think in straight lines. I also haven't worked in a formal capacity for 4 years. I know, you also diagnosed and neutralized a sophisticated multi-layered cyber sabotage plot in about 90 hours while doing another job simultaneously. A beat. I'm not worried about the gap on your resume. He laughed. Came out genuine. He heard her on the other end register it. I need to think about it, he said. Take whatever time you need. And I need to talk to Sophie. A brief pause. Of course. She has opinions about my professional decisions. She'll want input. Based on my experience of Sophie, Olivia said, she'll have already reached a conclusion before you finish asking the question. Probably, he agreed. There was a comfortable space in the conversation then. Not a silence exactly, something warmer. The specific quality of 2 people who have been through something real together and have found, to their mild surprise, that they can be easy with each other. How are you? He asked. It came out simply, without the weight of anything behind it, just an honest question. Tired, she said. Relieved. Still processing that someone spent 14 months planning to destroy something I spent 3 years building. Are you at the office? Yes? He checked the time, 10:47. It's almost 11. I know. Do you always work until 11? Most nights? A brief pause that had a rueful quality to it. My dad used to say you should be able to leave work behind at the door. Did he? He was a high school science teacher. He could never do it either. Something softened in her voice at that. The ease that comes when you mention someone you love without thinking about whether to. He'd bring tests home and grade them at the kitchen table and tell my mom it was just going to take an hour. How long did it take? Always 3 hours. My mom would make him coffee anyway. A pause. He died when I was 19. Heart attack. Very sudden. I'm sorry. It was... Yeah. She said it in the way of someone who has carried a thing long enough that the grief has changed shape but not size. It was part of why I drove so hard at the company when I got the chance. I kept thinking he didn't get enough time to see anything he built. I wanted to build something fast enough that... She stopped. Anyway. Not anyway, he said. That's a real thing. She was quiet for a moment. You're easy to talk to, she said, as if she'd just noticed. You don't do the thing people do where they wait for you to finish so they can respond.
I have a 7-year-old. You learn to actually listen. Or, she said, you just are that way. He didn't answer that. He let it sit where she'd put it. Go home, he said. Not because the work isn't important, just… He looked at the window, the one that didn't close. The building will still be there tomorrow. Whatever's on your desk at 11 at night will still be on your desk if you come in at 8 instead. She was quiet. He could hear her thinking. Is that what you do? She asked. Not always, but I've been doing it more. He thought about Sophie's 8:35 bedtime, the pasta, the cereal at the kitchen table, the particular irreplaceable value of ordinary, unexciting evenings. You figure out what you're actually trying to protect, and you make sure you're not so busy protecting it that you forget to have it. The line held a silence that was different from the earlier ones. I'll think about that, she said. She didn't say it like a dismissal. She said it like she meant it. Think about it while you're not at the office. A sound that was almost a laugh. Good night, Ethan. Good night. He put the phone down. He sat at the kitchen table in the quiet apartment and looked at the stack of bills and the window that didn't close and the kitchen Claire had painted a color she called warm stone, and he'd called slightly orange, and they'd argued about it twice and then laughed about it, and it had never gotten repainted. He was thinking. Yet chat. He talked to Sophie Sunday afternoon. They were at a park, the one on Maple with the good climbing structure that she'd deemed age-appropriate only for another year before she would outgrow it. And she was at the top of the structure and he was below it in the way of parents who station themselves at plausible rescue distance. I was thinking about taking a new job, he said. Sophie looked down at him. At the tech company? Probably, yeah. Olivia's company. Yes. She considered this. She moved along a horizontal bar with the focused ease of a kid who's done it 1,000 times. What kind of job? Running a division? Working on infrastructure problems? Things like what I was doing last week. Would you like it? I think so, yes. More than driving? He thought about the server room, the logs, the shape of a problem becoming clear, Priya's good questions, the particular clean feeling of a system restored. Yes, he said honestly, more than driving. Sophie reached the end of the bar and dropped to the platform on the other side. She sat down, legs dangling. Would the hours be bad? I'd make sure they weren't. She looked at him with the careful directness she'd inherited from Claire. You always say that, and then things get complicated and you work all the time. He took that. It was fair. This time, I'd have more control over it. It wouldn't just be me trying to manage around someone else's schedule. You'd be the boss? Sort of. I'd have a boss, but I'd have more say. She swung her legs. She was looking at the park, thinking in that particular unhurried way she had when something needed processing that she wasn't going to rush. Do you trust her? Sophie asked. He looked up at his daughter. Who? Olivia. He thought about it carefully, because the question deserved it. He thought about the lobby, and the 2 seconds and the 4-second decision. He thought about the 4th floor room, and that doesn't always make it smaller. He thought about the company-wide meeting and the version of the story she'd told without softening it in her favor. He thought about 11 o'clock at night, and a father who graded papers at the kitchen table for 3 hours while claiming it would only take 1. I think so, he said. Mostly. Trust is a process, he said. You build it with evidence. She's given me some evidence. Not all of it. Sophie absorbed this. Ms. Rivera says trust has to be earned and kept, not just earned once. Miss Rivera says a lot of things. She's right a lot of times. Sophie looked back at him. I liked her. Olivia. He paused. I know you did. She didn't try to be nice in a fake way. She just said real things. Yeah, she does that. And she asked me questions about myself like they actually mattered. Sophie said it with the precision of a child who has been asked fake questions enough times to recognize the difference. Some adults ask you questions, and then while you're answering, you can see them waiting for their turn to talk. She wasn't doing that. No, Ethan agreed. She doesn't do that. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then, you like her? He looked up at his daughter.
I respect her. Dad? What? Sophie gave him the look she'd learned from somewhere, direct, patient, faintly amused. The look of someone who knows more than they're saying and is waiting for the other person to catch up. I didn't say like her, she said. I said you like her. As a person. You get a different voice. What different voice? Less tired. You sound less tired when you talk about her. She tilted her head. It's a good different. He didn't answer that directly. He looked at the park. The other families, the kids on the climbing structure, a dog who had decided the park's general social contract didn't apply to it and was running through everything unchallenged. Take the job, Dad, Sophie said. Yeah? Yeah, you miss it, the real work. I can tell. She swung her legs. And Dad? Yeah. She should come to dinner again, at our house next time, so she can see what the real us is like. We had pho with fluorescent lighting, he said. I think she saw a fair amount of the real us. She saw the restaurant us. The house us is different. Sophie climbed to her feet on the platform with the confidence of someone who has never doubted her own balance. I'll make the salad, with the cucumber how I like it. You want to make salad for a billionaire CEO. Everyone likes a good salad. She jumped off the platform and landed on the wood-chipped ground and turned to face him. Call her Monday. I was going to think about it a little more. You've been thinking since Thursday, Sophie said. At some point, thinking becomes hiding. He looked at his daughter. She picked up a wood chip from the ground and turned it over in her fingers, examining it with the same thoroughness she brought to everything, and then she put it in her jacket pocket, which she sometimes did with small objects that interested her, a habit she'd had since she was tiny that he'd never understood and never asked about because it seemed to belong entirely to her. Monday, she said again, and walked toward the swings. He stood in the afternoon light and watched her go, this small person who had somehow ended up with more clarity than he had about most things, and thought about driving and servers and a woman who worked until 11 and had a father who graded tests at the kitchen table. He thought about the window that didn't close. He thought about warm stone, slightly orange. He pulled out his phone and looked at Olivia's name in his contacts for a moment. Then he put the phone back in his pocket. He'd call Monday. Sophie had given him until Monday. That was enough time. He went to push her on the swings. He called Monday at 9:17 between his second and third delivery stops, sitting in the van in a parking lot with a gas station on one side and a dry cleaner on the other. Olivia picked up on the second ring. Good morning. I'll take the job, he said. A pause. Short, but real. Okay. I have conditions. Tell me. School pickup is at 3:15. That's not negotiable on any day, for any meeting, for any deadline. If something runs long, it runs long without me in the room. Understood. I want the scope of the role in writing before I sign anything, not vague language about innovation and leadership. Actual scope. What I'm responsible for, what I'm not, who I report to, and who reports to me. I'll have legal draft it this week. You'll have it by Thursday. And I want Priya on my team. A longer pause this time. Priya runs network security. I know. I'm not asking to take her away from that. I'm asking for her to have a dual role. She can run her team and work with me on infrastructure development. She thinks well and she doesn't have ego about being wrong. That's rare. I'll talk to her, Olivia said. If she's willing, yes. That's all. That's all? That's all. He could hear the slight shift in her breathing that he'd come to recognize as her processing a version of something that wasn't what she'd expected. Most people negotiating a senior position ask for more, she said. I don't need more. I need what I said. Another pause. When can you start? He looked at the gas station, the dry cleaner, the ordinary Monday morning moving around his van. He thought about Carol at the depot, 22 years, the voice that stopped being surprised by anything around year 4. She'd been good to him. He needed to be decent about this, give proper notice, not leave her scrambling. 3 weeks, he said. I need to give my employer proper notice. 3 weeks is fine. A brief pause. Ethan? Yeah. Thank you for calling. Sophie told me to stop hiding behind thinking, he said. Her words. The sound that came through the phone was the real laugh again. The short, caught off guard one that had nothing performed about it. He had decided some days ago that this was his favorite version of her, this one that appeared when she forgot to manage herself. "Tell her thank you from me," Olivia said. "She'll want it in person," he said. "She's coming for dinner at your table next. Her idea." "My apartment isn't exactly—" "She doesn't care about your apartment. She cares about seeing the real you." He paused. Her words, again. A silence. "She's something, that kid." "Yeah," he said. "She is." He hung up and sat in the parking lot for another minute before starting the van. The morning was ordinary and specific and entirely itself. The gas station attendant leaning on the pump. A woman at the dry cleaner holding a suit and plastic over her shoulder. Pigeons doing their indifferent pigeon things on the curb. He looked at all of it with the particular clarity that comes when a decision has been made and the making is behind you. He started the van. He had deliveries to finish. The last 3 weeks at the depot had a particular texture that Ethan hadn't expected. He'd thought they would feel like waiting, like time between things. They didn't. They felt complete in themselves. Each route, each building, each manifest signed, and each part delivered was a thing done properly, not a thing being wound down. He was good at the job. He'd always been good at it. He wanted to leave it with the same care he'd brought to it. Carol took the news the way Carol took most news, without visible reaction, and then with more reaction than she'd shown, later in pieces. 3 weeks, she said when he told her. 3 weeks. I'll work every shift, full routes. I know you will. She looked at him with the unsentimental regard of someone who has watched a lot of people come and go for good reasons and bad ones. It's the tech company, the one from the lobby thing. Yes. The CEO offered you a job. Yes. After she had you thrown out. It's more complicated than that. Carol looked at him. Is it? He thought about it. Maybe not much more complicated, but some. She was quiet for a moment. You were wasted here, she said. Not unkindly, just true. I needed to be here, he said. It was what I needed, for a while. I know. She picked up a manifest from the desk, looked at it, put it back. Sophie's okay with the change? She's the one who told me to do it. Carol made the sound she made when something was both funny and not funny. That kid's going to run something someday. I know, Ethan said. I'm mildly terrified. You should be. She looked at him one more time, and the look had more in it than her voice usually let through. You were good here, Ethan, and I hope it's what you need. It might be, he said. I think it might be. His first week at Virion was not what the movies would have made of it. There was no triumphant entrance through the lobby, no symbolic moment of the man returning to the place that had cast him out, now vindicated. There was a parking badge, an HR packet, a benefits orientation that took 45 minutes and involved a video from the early 2000s that everyone in the room watched with the same expression of polite endurance. There was a new laptop with setup instructions that assumed you had never used a computer before, which he found more amusing than frustrating. There was a desk on the 6th floor and a shared workspace, not a corner office, because he'd told Olivia he didn't want a corner office, and she'd accepted that without discussion. There was also, on his second day, a conversation with his new team that went sideways in the first 10 minutes. There were 7 of them, a mix of infrastructure engineers and 2 developers who'd been told, with varying degrees of enthusiasm, that they were now part of an innovation division that hadn't fully defined its own scope yet. They were sitting in a conference room. Some of them were enthusiastic. A few were the specific kind of skeptical that comes from having been reorganized into multiple new divisions over multiple years and learning not to invest until something proved real. One of them, a man in his late 30s named Garrett, whose skepticism was the visible kind, said, 20 minutes in, no offense, but the last 3 innovation leads we had came in with big frameworks and left 8 months later when the frameworks didn't produce anything. Why is this different? The room went carefully quiet. I don't have a framework, Ethan said. Garrett looked at him. What do you have? Right now? Questions. Ethan looked at the room. I'm going to spend the first month asking each of you what's broken and what you've tried and what you think is being missed. Then I'm going to spend the second month understanding why. Then we'll talk about what to build." He paused. "I'm not going to come in here with a vision document and ask you to execute it. I've been on the receiving end of that approach, and it mostly produces expensive conferences and new stationery." A few people in the room did something that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the vicinity of it. Garrett was still watching him. "That's going to look slow to the people upstairs." "Probably," Ethan agreed. "The alternative is moving fast in the wrong direction, which is slower in the end." Garrett looked at him for another moment. Then he leaned back in his chair in the way of someone who has decided to reserve judgment rather than commit to opposition. "Okay," he said. "I can work with questions." It wasn't enthusiastic. It was honest, which was better.
But
The weeks that followed had the particular rhythm of new work, unfamiliar enough to be demanding, familiar enough in its fundamental nature, that Ethan found his footing faster than he'd expected. He was in the building by 8 most mornings, gone by 3:10, back on his laptop after Sophie's homework and dinner, and the 8:35 bedtime they'd upheld with a consistency that was, at this point, more ritual than rule. He was tired in a new way. Not the grinding accumulation of identical effort, but the specific tiredness of work that required him to think differently each day. He found he'd missed it with a depth he hadn't fully acknowledged to himself while it was absent. Priya said yes to the dual role, which he'd expected because Priya was constitutionally unable to not engage with an interesting problem, and she'd told him as much in almost those exact words when they sat down to discuss it. She brought a rigor to the infrastructure work that complemented the way he thought. She challenged his assumptions methodically, which he needed, and he saw patterns she didn't always see, which she needed, and together they produced a working approach faster than either would have alone. Garrett turned out to be excellent. This also wasn't a surprise. The specific kind of skepticism he'd displayed in that first meeting was the kind that came from caring about doing things properly, not from indifference. Once he'd decided Ethan wasn't running the same play as the previous 3 leads, he worked with the concentrated focus of someone who had been waiting for the right direction. By the end of the second month, they had a clear map of the 3 biggest structural vulnerabilities in Virion's infrastructure architecture. Not crises, none of them, but the kind of compounding weaknesses that become crises if you let them sit. They had a proposed development plan that Ethan presented to Olivia and her executive team in a meeting that lasted 2 hours and went over by 40 minutes, which he apologized for and she dismissed with a gesture. "Don't apologize for going over when the material justifies it," she said afterward, when the room had emptied. "Some of your VPs looked like they had somewhere to be." "They always look like they have somewhere to be. It's a power signal." She gathered her notes. "The plan is good. The timeline is realistic. I've had 3 consultants tell me we needed to rebuild from the ground up and charge me a lot to say so. You're telling me we need to fix 5 specific things in a specific order, and here's why. That's useful." "The ground-up approach is usually how you sell a big contract," he said, "not how you solve a problem." "I know." She looked at him across the conference table. "That's why you're here, and they're not." He was learning her, in the way that you learn people you work closely with, not their presented version, but the actual texture of how they move through a day. She thought fast, but didn't always think completely, which she knew about herself and which was why she surrounded herself with people who thought slowly and carefully. She was harder on herself than on anyone who worked for her, which was both a quality and a problem. She made decisions cleanly, except when the decision involved something personal, at which point she stalled in a way that was obvious to anyone watching and that she was apparently unaware of. She also, he noticed, ate lunch at her desk most days. Not because she was that busy. She was busy, but it was a choice, not a necessity. It was the specific behavior of someone who has spent so long treating alone time as default that they've stopped registering it as a choice. He started around the 3rd month, occasionally asking her to eat in the common area on 9. Not always. Not with any pressure behind it. Just, "I'm going to the 9th floor, come eat actual food." She came about half the time. When she did, she was different from the conference room version. Not unprofessional, just less constructed, the gap between performance and person a little smaller. He didn't analyze it too much. He filed it the way he'd been filing things about her for months. As information, as evidence, as the slow accumulation of a picture that wasn't complete yet but was becoming clearer. The Gavin Reese case resolved in the 4th month. He and Marcus Webb had both been charged, Reese with the full weight of the economic sabotage and conspiracy charges, Webb with a lesser set of charges in exchange for cooperation. Reese's attorney had made public statements about wrongful termination and retaliation, which Olivia's legal team had addressed point by point with documentation, and which had dissolved fairly quickly under scrutiny. Ethan heard about most of it from Denny, who tracked it with the interest of someone who had spent several very bad nights in a server room because of it. He attended one meeting with Virion's outside counsel to give a technical account of what he'd found in the logs. A dry 2-hour process that involved a lot of lawyers asking him to clarify things that were already clear. He didn't mind. It was part of closing the loop. The day the charges were formally filed, Olivia sent him a message at 7 in the evening. Just, "It's done." He replied, "Good. Go home." 3 minutes later, "I am home." He looked at that for a moment, then, "Good." He put his phone down. Sophie was at the kitchen table working on a project, a poster about the water cycle that involved more glitter than was structurally necessary, but which she was deeply committed to. He sat across from her and watched her work and thought about Gavin Reese in Tucson, Arizona, 14 months of patience dissolving into nothing. There was something in that story that he'd been sitting with since it emerged. Not sympathy, not for the method, but something more complicated. Reese had spent 12 years building something. He'd been replaced without ceremony by someone half his age who immediately proved more capable than he'd been. The loss of that must have been enormous. The 14 months of planning, the meticulous construction of the attack, all of it came from a specific kind of pain, the kind that festers when you believe you were discarded without being properly seen. Ethan understood that particular pain in a way that made him uncomfortable. He wasn't Gavin Reese. He'd never been Gavin Reese. But the lobby, the 2 seconds, the escort to the door, he understood the experience of being reduced to a surface reading by someone with the power to act on that reading. Reese had chosen one response to that experience. Ethan had chosen another. The difference between those two choices was not a comfortable thing to contemplate, because the difference was not as large as you'd want it to be. It was, in the end, a choice, made in the specific conditions of a specific person's character and history. He'd had Sophie. He'd had Denny. He'd had a daughter who told him that not helping someone when you can help them makes you the hurt one. You make the choices you make because of who you are and what you have and who's depending on you to be better than the worst version of yourself. That's not a neat moral. It's just true. He looked at Sophie's water cycle poster. You have a lot of glitter on the evaporation section. It's supposed to look like it's sparkling, like water in the sun. It's going to get everywhere. It already has. She showed him her forearm, which was, in fact, extensively glittered. I'm committed now. He laughed. She grinned without looking up. Yeah, he thought. You make the choice because of what you have. Or what? The dinner at Olivia's apartment happened on a Saturday in the 5th month, which was a Saturday in early November when the city had gone the particular shade of gray gold that it went in the weeks before winter properly settled in. Her apartment was on the 12th floor of a building downtown, which Sophie had thoughts about, specifically that 12 floors was a lot of floors and the elevator was very fast. The apartment itself was clean and quiet and full of books, which Sophie noticed immediately and which seemed to shift something in her assessment. You have a lot of books, Sophie said, standing in the entryway looking at the shelf that ran along the main wall. I do, Olivia said. She was in the kitchen, doing something that involved a cutting board and what appeared to be genuine concentration, not ordering in, actually cooking. Have you read all of them? Most of them. Some I bought meaning to read and haven't. Which ones? Olivia looked up. The green ones on the 3rd shelf, mostly. I go through phases of buying things and then not having time. Sophie went to the 3rd shelf. She examined the green books with the seriousness of an auditor. This one looks good, she said, pulling one out. It's about a woman who discovers something important. What's the title? Sophie looked. I can't pronounce the author's name. Bring it here. Sophie brought it to the kitchen. Olivia looked at it, chopping something without looking down, the knife moving with the automatic confidence of someone who cooks for themselves often enough that it's just motion. "I bought that 3 years ago," Olivia said. "I meant to read it on a vacation I canceled." "You canceled your vacation?" "There was a problem at work." Sophie looked at the book. "You should read it this time." "Maybe I will." Sophie put it back on the shelf. Then she came and stood at the kitchen counter and watched Olivia cook with the frank assessment she brought to anything new. "What are you making?" "Roast chicken. I hope that's okay. I asked your dad if you had things you didn't eat. He said I don't like green beans." "There are no green beans." "Good." Sophie watched her work. "You cook for yourself?" "Usually. It's one of the things I actually leave work for." Sophie seemed to accept this as a point in Olivia's favor. She sat on one of the counter stools and they cooked and talked, or rather, Olivia cooked and Sophie asked questions, and Ethan stood in the living room pretending to look at the city view and actually listening to the two of them with an attention that had a particular quality he couldn't name precisely, something in the register of something fragile and important that you don't want to disturb by looking at it directly. Olivia answered Sophie's questions with the same directness she'd shown at the Fio restaurant, not performing patience with a child, not simplifying, just talking to her like a person who was asking real things. Sophie had questions about the company, about decisions Olivia had made that she'd read about online because apparently Sophie had been quietly researching Olivia since the faux dinner, which neither Ethan nor Olivia had known until Sophie mentioned it with complete nonchalance. "You looked me up?" Olivia said. "I wanted to know who my dad was going to work for," Sophie said. "It was due diligence." "Ethan, from the living room." "She uses phrases like that now." "She's been using them since she was 6, came the reply from the kitchen. The chicken took about an hour. They ate at Olivia's table, which was real wood and slightly too big for one person, the kind of table that was clearly bought with a vision of meals it hadn't yet had. Sophie declared the chicken good, which from Sophie was high praise, and asked for seconds, which Olivia served with an expression that was doing its best not to be pleased and not entirely succeeding. After dinner, Sophie asked if she could look at the books again. Olivia said yes. Sophie took herself to the shelves and became absorbed, which left Ethan and Olivia at the table with the dishes and the particular quietness of a meal just finished. "She researched me," Olivia said, quietly enough that Sophie wouldn't hear. "She researches things she cares about," Ethan said. "She cares about her dad's career choices." "She cares about her dad." He looked at the table. "She's been the one watching out for me as much as I've been watching out for her. I'm not sure when that started." Olivia was quiet for a moment. "You know what she said to me before you came in from the living room earlier, while we were cooking?" "What?" "She said, 'My dad smiles more now than he did before.' She said it like she was telling me something she thought I should know." He didn't respond immediately. He looked at the window. The city, the gray-gold November evening, the lights coming on in the buildings across from them. "She notices everything," he said finally. "I know." A pause. "Is she right?" He thought about it. He thought about the mornings, the early deliveries replaced by the 6th-floor workspace, and the problems that changed shape every week. He thought about the team meetings, and Garrett's dry precision and Priya's systematic mind. He thought about the lunch on the 9th floor, the conference table, Olivia across from him with her notes and her arguments, and the real laugh she still deployed without warning. "Yeah," he said, "she's right." Olivia looked at him, not the measured look, not the professional consideration, just looking at him, the way you look at someone when you've stopped managing the act of looking. "I'm not good at this," she said. "At what?" "This." She gestured at the table, the apartment, the general direction of Sophie at the bookshelf. "People? The regular part of things. I'm good at the work. I'm not as good at the rest." "You made a good chicken," he said. She almost smiled. "I practice cooking because it's the one thing I can do alone that doesn't feel like being alone." She paused. "That probably sounds strange." "It sounds honest." "I don't know how to I spent so many years making the company work that I don't always know what I'm doing when it's not the company." She looked at her hands on the table. "My last relationship ended 2 years ago because he said I wasn't present. He meant it as a criticism, and he was right. I just didn't know how to fix it at the time." "Do you know how now?"
I'm not sure. I know it starts with actually leaving work when you leave work. She looked up. You told me that on the phone. The thing about protecting what you have versus being too busy protecting it. I remember. I've thought about it a lot. He looked at her. The table between them had the remains of a dinner on it, evidence of an ordinary evening, the kind she'd probably had fewer of than she should have. Sophie was humming something quietly at the bookshelf, a tuneless half-melody she made when she was deeply engaged. Olivia, he said. She looked at him. I'm not in a hurry, he said. For anything. I want you to know that. She held his gaze. What does that mean? It means... He thought about how to say it without making it larger or smaller than it was. 4 months ago, you were the CEO who had me walked out of a lobby. Now you're someone I trust. Someone who made my daughter a chicken dinner and answered every question she asked without flinching. He paused. Things move at the pace they move. I'm not trying to get ahead of it. I'm here. That's what I'm saying. She was quiet for a long moment. Something settled in her expression, something that had been held carefully in place and had decided, in this particular moment, that it could rest. I'm here too, she said, quietly. Just the fact of it. From the bookshelf, Sophie called, Dad, can I borrow this one? Ask Olivia. Olivia, can I borrow this one? Olivia looked toward the shelf. Which one? The green one. The one you bought for the vacation. A pause. Yes, Olivia said. You can borrow it. Thank you. A beat. I'll return it when we come back for dinner next time. Neither of the adults at the table had confirmed there would be a next time. Sophie had simply decided there would be, announced it as settled, and returned to examining the spine. Ethan looked at Olivia. Olivia looked at Ethan. She's running things already, Olivia said. She really is, he agreed. A year has a way of moving, not smoothly. Nothing real moves smoothly. It moves in pieces, some of them hard and some of them ordinary, and you look back from the other end of it and see a shape you couldn't see while you were inside it. By the following October, Virion's infrastructure division had completed the first phase of the rebuild plan. 3 of the 5 structural vulnerabilities resolved, the 4th in progress, the 5th scheduled for the spring. The government contract was in its 2nd year and running without incident. The team on the 6th floor had grown from 7 people to 11, and they had developed the specific, slightly weathered cohesion of people who had done difficult things together and trusted each other because of it, not despite it. Garrett had become, in the way of people who decide to commit, indispensable. Priya ran her dual role with the efficient excellence that apparently characterized everything she did. Denny, still in IT, wandered up to the 6th floor with a frequency that suggested he had adopted them as an extended work family. Marcus Webb had taken a plea agreement. Gavin Reese had not, had gone to trial, and had lost. His attorney's wrongful termination narrative had lasted precisely as long as it took Olivia's legal team to introduce the evidence into the record. He was facing sentencing in the new year. Ethan had no interest in following the sentencing. It was over. What came from it was already done. Sophie was 8 now and had decided that succulents were no longer sufficient and wanted a fish tank, a request she had been prosecuting with the systematic patience of a long-term campaign. She had printed off care guides. She had identified the specific tank size that would fit her windowsill. She had prepared a presentation, technically unprompted, titled Why a Fish Tank is a Good Idea, Evidence-Based, which she had delivered to Ethan on a Tuesday evening while he was trying to eat dinner. He had told her he'd think about it. She had said she'd give him 2 weeks. She had started a countdown. Olivia had heard about the fish tank campaign from Ethan and had made the mistake of mentioning to Sophie that she thought the presentation was compelling, after which Sophie had recruited her as a formal ally and produced a group text titled Fish Tank Support Team that currently had 3 members, the third being Mrs. Okafor, who had joined without fully understanding what she was joining. This was how it was, now. Not the shape Ethan had imagined in the years when he was imagining shapes, but real, specific, actual. Olivia came to dinner on Sundays more often than not. She had read the green book from her shelf and reported to Sophie that it was, in fact, good, which Sophie accepted as vindication. She and Ethan had found, over time,
the thing that exists on the other side of two people deciding to be honest with each other. Not easy, not without friction, but grounded in something that had been tested and held. She still worked late some nights. He still left at 3:10 most days. They had argued twice, once about a decision she made unilaterally that affected his team, which she acknowledged was wrong, and once about something smaller that neither of them could precisely articulate afterward, which was its own kind of argument. Both times they'd come back to each other with the specific effort of two people who have decided that coming back matters more than being right. He had not repainted the kitchen. He had decided, sometime in the spring, that he wasn't going to. The color was hers, and it could stay. On the last Saturday of October, which was cold and specific the way late October is in this city, the three of them drove out to a state park about 40 miles east and walked a trail that Sophie had identified from a map with the same systematic attention she brought to all her plans. The trail wound through stands of cottonwood that had gone yellow, the kind of yellow that looks like it's generating its own light. The sky was the particular blue of cold, clear days. Sophie walked ahead of them most of the time because she had a destination in mind and the two adults behind her were talking too slowly, and she had no patience for pace when there was terrain to cover. Ethan and Olivia walked side by side on the trail. They talked, and then they didn't, and the not talking was the kind that doesn't need to be filled. She had her jacket collar up against the cold. He had his hands in his pockets. "I've been thinking about something," Olivia said. "About what?" "About the lobby." She said it without weight, just bringing it up. "About that Tuesday. I think about it sometimes still." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She looked at the trail ahead of them, at Sophie's red jacket moving through the yellow trees. "I think about the version of everything where I asked a question instead of making a call, where I said, 'Who are you and why are you here?' instead of deciding I already knew." "You couldn't have predicted Chua." "No, I couldn't have, but that's not really the point." She paused. "The point is the habit. The habit of deciding you have enough information when you have almost none. I was efficient because being wrong was fast, and I'd moved on before the cost landed on anyone I had to see." He thought about that. He thought about the version where he wasn't Ethan Calloway, the version where nobody called, where the system failed on Thursday, where 400 people went to work on a Friday not knowing that their next year was now a different shape. He thought about all the people like that, the ones with the worn knees and the supply company jackets, removed from lobbies by people who'd already decided. "Did you change it?" he asked. "The habit." She thought about it. "I'm better," she said. "I catch myself now. I stop before the fast call, and I ask at least one question first." She paused. "I still get it wrong sometimes." "Everyone gets it wrong sometimes. Some of us get it wrong more publicly than others." He looked sideways at her. "You stood up in front of 400 people and told them exactly how wrong you got it. You could have framed it differently. You didn't." "No. That matters." She was quiet for a moment. The cottonwoods moved. Somewhere ahead, Sophie was calling back about something she'd seen, a bird or a rock formation, something that required their attention. "You came back," Olivia said. "After what I did. You came back and did the thing that mattered." She looked at him. "I've thought about why you did that about 100 times. I still don't have a clean answer." "There isn't one," he said. "It's not one thing." "What is it?" He thought about Sophie at the kitchen table. He thought about Denny's voice at 5:50 in the morning. He thought about Priya and her good questions. He thought about 400 people who didn't know what was happening on the floors above them, and the specific weight of knowing you could see something they couldn't. "It's that the problem was real, and I could see it," he said. "And when you can see something real, looking away is its own kind of decision." She held that for a moment. "That's it?" she said. "And Sophie told me not to be an idiot." She laughed. "The real one, the short, unguarded one." And it went up into the yellow trees and the cold blue air, and Sophie turned around from 50 feet ahead and shouted, "What's funny?" And Olivia called back, "Your dad!" And Sophie turned forward again with the dismissive comprehension of someone who has encountered this dynamic before. They walked on. The trail curved around a low ridge and opened onto a wide view, the plains extending east, the city a low smudge west, the sky doing its full October business overhead. Sophie was already at the viewpoint, standing with her hands on the railing, looking at the geography of it. They came and stood beside her, the three of them, looking at the same thing. "It goes really far," Sophie said. "Yeah," Ethan said. "Can you see everything from here?" "Not everything, just a lot." She leaned on the railing. The wind moved through her braids. She considered the view with the same quality she brought to the water cycle poster and the fish tank research and the green book she'd read in 2 weeks, and returned with 6 questions about it written on a sticky note. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." "Do you think Mom would have liked this?" He was quiet for a moment. The question landed where it always landed, in the specific place that was still tender even after 4 years, the place that healed but didn't close. "Yes," he said. "She would have stood right here and told us the names of everything she could see." She knew the names of things. Everything. Trees, birds, rock types. She kept a notebook. Sophie looked at the planes, absorbing this. "I want to keep a notebook." "Then keep one." "Will you help me start it?" "Yeah, I will." She nodded, satisfied. She straightened up from the railing and looked at Olivia beside her. "What do you think about when you look at this?" Olivia looked at the view for a moment. "I think that there's a lot of world I haven't been paying attention to while I was looking at screens." Sophie considered this. "That's a good answer." "Is it?" "It means you're learning something." Sophie turned from the railing and began heading back down the trail with the decisive energy of someone whose scenic moment is complete and whose legs want to move. "We should go. I want to see the creek at the bottom." She went. They watched her go. Then they looked at each other, standing at the viewpoint with the view behind them, and something passed between them that wasn't complicated, just warm, just real, just the specific thing that exists between two people who found each other through a mess of mistakes and chose, despite and because of all of it, to keep finding each other. He reached over and took her hand. She let him. They stood there for another minute. The plains extended east. Sophie's red jacket bobbed down the trail toward the creek. The cottonwoods held their yellow light. There was no version of this that was clean or without cost. He'd lost Claire. Sophie had grown up faster than she should have. Olivia had spent years alone in a too-large apartment eating dinners at a too-large table. Reese had wasted 14 months of his life on destruction. Webb was 26 and already carrying something he'd carry for a long time. None of it was clean. The world wasn't a place where things were clean, but here was what was also true. You could look at a person in 2 seconds and see nothing, or you could look longer and find someone you didn't expect. You could protect what you've built so fiercely that you forget to live inside it, or you could let someone sit at your table and eat your chicken and borrow your book and tell you something true about yourself. You could walk out of a lobby and keep walking, or you could go back in. You didn't always get the chance to go back in. When you did, you used it. Ethan had used it. Not perfectly. Not without the weight of what it cost him. But he'd used it, and standing at the top of a trail on a cold October Saturday with his daughter ahead and his hand holding someone else's, he understood that the using of it had been the only right answer he had. Not because it was brave or noble or any other word you reach for when you want to make a story into a lesson. Just because it was what he could do. And doing what you can, when you can, for the people who need it, that's as close to the truth of things as he'd ever gotten. Down the trail, Sophie had found the creek. He could hear her calling for them. "Come on," he said. They went down together.